everybody to this condolence meeting organized by the CSSSC. As you all know, we are gathered here today to honor the memory of our esteemed colleague and friend and teacher, Professor Pradip Bose, who left us so suddenly on the 29th of May, so much before his time. Pradip Bose joined the CSSSC in 1987 as senior fellow, before which he was at the Center for Social Studies, Surat, at a time when it was still located at the old premises at 10 Lake Terrace. Retiring then almost 20 years later in 2008 as professor of sociology. His contribution to his discipline as a scholar and to each of our lives of those who knew, loved, and respected him was immeasurable. I hope that each of the speakers who will follow will have their own unique way of sharing their thoughts with us, both about his work and his learning, and also, more inevitably with Pradipda than with most, about his personality and who he was as a human being. So I will ask, first of all, Pradipda's daughter, Tapti Bose, who is here today with us, and his wife, Mrs. Shukla Bose, to start the condolence meeting today by saying a few words. Are you here? Can you unmute yourself and speak? Then automatically we will be able to see you, I think.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go. Yes. Hello.
Thank you.
Please go ahead. Yes.
Yes. Thank you for actually inviting me and my mother, and actually thank you for actually hosting this condolence meeting. I would like to thank the center because it's overwhelming that my father retired in the year 2008, and now it is 2021, but still, people, the people who knew him even long before that are actually sending me condolence messages. They keep on pouring in. The phone keeps on ringing. People still are, the condolence messages are not just formal messages, but, huge descriptions of, the time they spent with him, about his sense of humor, his warmth. And even today I received some of them. And it's incredible that the center is actually hosting this, even though he retired in 2008. Now, one thing is that my memories about my father are, like innumerable. And it's difficult. It has been difficult for me to choose as to what I should say about him, because his work also post-retirement, which he was doing, which I was lucky enough to witness when I was young. As I have been a student of law, so not of social science. But when I grew up and post-retirement, when he was working from home, I was able to witness the way he worked in his library, which was more like a studio and a laboratory, fused into one. And that work itself is also so vast and so deep that also, would take a lot of time to tell that. But I think that having been asked to open up, and I have decided to actually follow my heart and speak about, two things which he loved the most, which was a part of, his everyday life. It was a part of my memories with him, intertwined since childhood. And I'll just speak very briefly about his love for music and his love for food and cooking. I know it's a bit odd, starting this in the beginning of the meeting, but that was something which he really loved. It was a part of what I said, everyday life. And why I say this is because he was able to explore these two things when he came to Kolkata from, Surat. And it actually started out with his joining the center in the Jadunath Bhavan, as it was. So, this went parallel to his life in the center. And one thing I want to say is that both these, loves of his life, he was able to actually materialize into two books. One is Poschime Drupadi Sangit Nirman, and the other is Bangali Totto Talash. These two books, he was actually post-retirement, he was able to write about these things as though he was someone who was very knowledgeable about these two subjects. And these two are actually Bortomaner Puloji Bichar and Bhasha Darshan Sangit. These two books actually have got a lot of popularity, but these two books, the one especially on the Western classical music, has been my personal favorite, very close to my heart, that book, because actually I just want to be a bit brief, but I just want to get into this thing that my father, when he came here in Kolkata, he used to collect a lot of the cassettes and the records. One of them was in Melody, the shop which was close to the office. And he actually started learning the instrument, the violin, and he was very keen that I learn the instruments. So he taught, under his inspiration, I learned it with a lot of the teachers in Kolkata. But what happened was post-retirement, as I joined my profession, and my father also became busy with his writing, we didn't get much time to learn the instruments, but we filled that gap in by listening to a lot of that music. The YouTube came in, the listening to the videos. And I just want to, I'm saying this because every day that would happen, listening to the videos with him. And it was like, it wasn't like it was a serious subject, but it wasn't like, very serious when I was watching with him, because he would have these anecdotes, these witticisms. He would inform me about the history in a manner which was, he would inform me about the history in a manner which was, so interesting, and sometimes make me laugh. It would just leave me in splits sometimes, that way. And every day we would listen, we would discuss. That happened. And when he actually, why I want to say about this is many people don't know this, that when he actually decided to write this book, it was very difficult to get a publisher, because he wrote it in Bengali, and it was really an act of courage to write this book in Bengali. It was, I think, one of the first, in Bengali prose, of writing about Western classical music in Bengali. And when I'll just say about one chapter in the book, the Beethoven Violin Concerto, which was, which was his favorite piece of music. Since my childhood, I've been hearing that third movement, and I didn't really know much about it. But when the last few years of his retirement, when we would listen to that, and he would listen to all the interpretations of that piece of music, beginning from Chrysler to Heifetz to Oistrakh to Perlman, Hilary Hahn, to the very recent interpretations. And we would just it wouldn't really seem like, and when I actually go through that chapter in that book, what I want to say is that that book is any beginner can actually understand such a serious subject, but someone who has actually known the subject since childhood would actually find that there is nothing much more to write. If you go through the chapter, that one chapter I'm saying, he has written a lot of others about Mozart, Bach, and the entire period, but that one specific chapter I'm saying, because of short of time, there is nothing much more to write. And he has actually written about the history of the concerto, how it was first performed by Joachim, why it was performed, all the other interpretations. He has explained the differences between each of the violinists, what is there. And when he actually writes about that piece of music, he explains its structure, the three movements, its themes, the way he explains it. I read it, yesterday, and I could actually hear the music, being, and he's written it in Bengali in such a beautiful manner that, but I think that he wrote it more as a lover of music, rather than a critique. And as in real life, critiques get more importance than lovers. So I think that book didn't get the publisher as quickly as it should have. But ultimately, I think he did get a publisher. The publisher did a good job in publishing the book. And it is that book, in spite of his other books which are very popular or very well known in the academic circles, I wanted to speak about this book because it is so close to my heart. And every time I read it, just that memory of him listening together, that entire thing, the just comes out in that book. I'll just speak another thing very shortly. His What many people don't know is that his love for food and that he was a great cook, a wonderful cook who would have actually given some of the five-star chefs, a run for their money. He was such a good cook. My mother, she took care of the breakfast and the lunch, but the evening snack, he would do it on his own. When he grew a bit older, I would say, please don't exert yourself and get into this thing, but he loved it. He had this huge collection of, the cookery books from, some time past till the present. And in that book, Bangali Jeta Totto Tola, she actually did a chapter on food. And why I want to say this is that when he started writing this chapter on food, many people said, and they called him that, it was a fall from grace, writing about food. You write about high philosophy, and now you are writing about food. I mean, but I think that he was a bit discouraged. He was a bit unhappy. But I don't blame the people who said that for saying this, because I think that the standard of food writing in Kolkata is so low that, it always starts at some place, like Mitro Cafe, and people go to Onadi Cabin and they say that the food is supple and crunchy and everything, and it's sweet and sour and everything at the same time. He would also say this thing, and it strangely ends up in some sweet shop in like Nopur or something. But what he did was, I am a student of law, but not about social science. But that piece of writing is really a gem of a piece of writing on food, a cultural exploration of the Bengali identity through food. I have read, I say this with a bit of authority because I'm a fan of food writing, and that piece of writing is actually so fresh and so deep. It's extremely deep. So many years of knowledge have been condensed in a few pages, written so lucidly in Bengali. You won't even think that, this person actually has done so much of research into that. But at the same time, it's written like not like a scholarly or an academic article, but as a very popular kind of food writing. It's a gem of a writing. And the what he used to cook, he always wanted me to taste it, and or someone he didn't like to cook alone. He was always wanting people to appreciate that. And I would say whenever he was there, I would say that yes, it's very good, but it really was very good. That love for food and music actually translated into his books, and both these books actually reflected, I think, what he was, the kind of person that he was, his sincerity, the depth of his knowledge, his humility, and that sense of humor that he had. I think the writing, I think that reflected in both these pieces of writing. I wanted to share this because when I was doing the ritual ceremonies, the priest was telling me that, you should give the food which he loves. So I think music and cooking were his loves of his life. I wanted to just share this experience. And I think that I have come here more eager as a listener than a speaker, but and I'm very eager that people will enrich my memories of him. It will continue for a long time, but I felt that it was a bit of a duty on my part to enrich their memories as well by telling about some aspects about him which they might not know. Thank you. And once again, I'm overwhelmed by the I think navigating the healthcare system and the peak of the pandemic was devastating. The last 2 days, before he passed away, were when he lost consciousness. But before that, he has always been so optimistic, so full of life. He has such a zest for life that I just wanted to speak about music and this because that was related to that, that zest for life that he had. His last book on Freud and Foucault and the play Oedipus is due to be published, just for the information of people who want to
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for telling us about that. Yeah.
getting into that. But one thing I must say is that the so many people have been actually asking me about his health when he was ill. I was not able to reply to all of them. I apologize. Some of them are over here, and the condolence messages, which are full of warmth, I've been able to reply as it has sunk in that he's no more. But that will also take a bit of time for me to know. But thank you for all his colleagues in the center for being present today. I think his colleagues from Surat are also, a few
Yes.
of them are present.
Yes.
And also a lot of his students might, I think, be present. My uncle has said he would be present. I'm not being able to see them. So I think that this meeting will actually give me a lot of comfort, and the memories which will be shared will actually be a part of me for really a lifetime.
I
So
hope so. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. Will your mother say something now, or
she'll speak a bit later, I think. I
okay?
think she
Okay.
speaks
So you
towards
just
the
tell me whenever she wishes to speak,
end.
and I'll certainly uh, sort of connect. So thank you very much, Tapti. Thank you for sharing your memories. Your memories will be different from most of the rest of us here. So I'm glad, and it's such a wonderful way that you've approached it through food and music. So thank you for your thoughts. I will ask next after you, um, Professor Omyo Bakchi, former director of the CSSSC, to say a few words. Omyuda, are you here? Can you unmute yourself and speak? And then that's the simplest way for all of us to really. I can see that Omyu Babu is among the participants. I saw him join.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes. I can both see you and hear you. So please go ahead, Omyu Babu. Yes.
One of the burdens of living long is that people we have known as friends, colleagues, pass away. And particularly when these people are younger than you, very much younger than Professor Pradip Bose was, this is doubly burdensome. The loss of a valued colleague and the loss of a much younger man who had a lot more to give to the world and should not have passed away according to if there was any kind of universal justice in this world. The two things I remember very well about Pradip was that he had always a ready smile for everyone. He would always greet anybody with "Bhalo to," and a very warm smile on his face, not a grin or a smirk, but a very warm smile. And the other thing is that he loved teaching. He was a natural teacher. He chose research and teaching not as a profession, but as a vocation. And I think from the reports that I have heard from various people, the students reciprocated the love with love and respect for the teacher who loved them so much. Unfortunately, I did not know at all anything about his love of music, his love of food. And so Tapti's uh, statement about the way he not just loved Western music, I also love Western music, but I simply listen to it without trying to analyze exactly how it is being done, what are the various variations. I've listened to most of Beethoven, most of Bach, most of Mozart, most of Brahms, but only as a listener. I could now find from Tapti that Professor Bose was a connoisseur of Western music, not just a listener. And his book on Western music, as Tapti said, is a path-breaking one in Bengali, because I don't know of any other book on this subject. And I also did not know anything about his cooking. I'm a terrible cook. I can only make tea, boil eggs, and give very taste, maybe make a kind of just tolerable mutton jhol and dal, nothing more. So somebody who can cook so well and also knowledgeable about cooking, really, what can you say, is a wondrous person. Not many of my male friends actually can cook. In my generation, uh, it was very rare for men to cook. It was direct to the women. It is only when it came to a younger generation that men began to cook. And earlier on, it was thought that the uh, way to a man's heart was for a woman to cook. Now it became a way to a woman's heart for the man to cook. So I'm also envious of Pradip about this. Fortunately, I did not have to do that in order to be able to get somebody to love me. When Pradip joined the center, I think he was working on the French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss. I don't know how much he went on with it. The only other pieces of work that I know of him was a penetrating chapter he did on the way children are brought up in Indian, particularly Bengali families, in the book edited by Professor Pradip Chatterjee. Uh, what is it called? Talking of Power or something like that. It was really a very penetrating chapter. And the only other two books I know about is a collection of 19th century periodicals on health that he edited. They were in the collection of the Govinath Bhavan, which had been earlier started under the Invita project of the CSSSC. And the other book that I know is a book which he edited on refugees. That also is quite valuable because there are many aspects of the refugees that still have to be researched. I think that also will lead other people to research. That is all that I can say. I'm sorry that I did not come to know Pradip all that well, because partly because our fields of research were different. I knew economics and economic historians much better, and he did not live nearby so that we could visit each other. And I'm very sorry to have missed many of the aspects of his personality, which are wonderful. And I thank Rosinka and the CSSC and Tapti for enlightening me about many aspects of Pradip's personality that I did not know anything about. Many thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for joining us here today, Ami Babu. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I will now ask Professor Ghansham Shah, colleague and friend of Pradip Das from the Center for Social Studies, Surat. Um, Professor Shah, if you could,
Yeah,
yes, just
and
unmute and speak. Yes, please go ahead.
thank you very much, CSS and Rusika, for uh, asking me to join this condolence meeting. Uh, I have a long memory, about 50 years with Pradeep. Uh, I when I asked him somewhere in 1974, 75, I think, uh, to join Surat Center. It was quite new and there were not many people. And we were just struggling to build a team there. And I was not sure whether he would come from Delhi to Surat. Surat is a very mafussil place academically, a small university, uh, and no other academic activities. But he immediately agreed and he really joined the center uh, after submitting his uh, PhD thesis and then remained for more than 10 years with us. Uh, During this association of 10 years, uh, he not only participated in academic activities, because it was a formative years, and at that time our trust was certification, tribal studies, and so on and so forth. He did Gujarat and West Bengal. But being a small institute, we wanted to build a team, and team is sharing ideas, exchanging views, and we didn't have a rules start center without rules, just joining it as and when necessary. We formulated. So that's a challenging time, and he participated in all processes of forming loads, forming teams, conceptualizing projects, identifying and locating institutions from where we can get funds and so on and so forth. And that was very, very important for a small formative institutions. Uh, I distinctly remember when he joined, we were in a small rented building. And after 3 years, we moved. We had got a land in university campus and we built a building. We didn't have fun, so preferred to have a low cost building. And Laurie Baker was kind enough to help us. Uh, so it's a low cost building. Pradeep participated in conceptualizing building, discussing with Laurie. Uh, Not only that, thereafter, when the Dipankar joined after a year or so, uh, we and other colleague Punarekar, we all spent time supervising the building, uh, in actually putting a physical labor, you see, helping the contractor to work done as efficiently as possible and as low cost as possible, which I consider is a very valuable for a institute uh, which is not big and without the funds. Uh, Pradeep, while he was there, and as Tapti told us in more detail, his love for music and also games. He was interested in cricket and obviously football, being a Bengali. And we used to talk about cricket during the break, during the tea time. What we call is the adda of tea time, which continues for several hours, discussing not only academic kind of a thing, but administrative kind of thing, and all kinds of things, not only of Gujarat, of India, but the world over. And it was an interesting corner, and small corner in a rented building. We made a point to have a special corner, a coffee corner or a tea corner, where you used to spend 3-4 hours together. Uh, and I believe, and Tapti is an example, that Shukla and he gave it their daughter's name Tapti, carrying the Surat memory with them all throughout the life. Uh, Sometimes in a small institute, and this is not a, I'm talking about the 1970s, things might have changed here and there. but research institutes are always struggling. At that time, and I believe today also, to finding out the funds, because it's not a research university where you have a definite grant that flows. We have to struggle with ICSSR, with the state government, and Gujarat state government was not very enthusiastic to encourage uh, this kind of activity. So we have small funds. So we have to do a several projects in which we were not immediately interested, but we saw that it is a possibility of get funds so that we can absorb one or two more colleagues and build our library. And I remember that in 1982-83, we had another project, and they were interested to do a study on uh, manpower. It was not his subject nor mine, uh, but we thought that this gives a lot of money, and we negotiated with economists in the university, but he will take 3-4 months. Meanwhile, we started, and he willingly spent time. We visited the tribal area, and while doing and collecting this data through a survey, asking, we also collected data of our own interest about tribal life, their culture, and then family life, and so on and so forth. So, and that really helped me that in 90, I, and Professor Kannan of a Trivandrum Institute in Hargopa, we four worked together in a study group appointed by the Rural Labor Commission on a migrant labor. And we spent about 10 days in Trivandrum, sitting together, all of us, sitting together to write a report. So that was his interest and a commitment. And that continued all throughout. Uh, we miss when he left it, but I could understand because Sukla wanted to be there. Uh, and obviously, he was interested to move to Kolkata. And I know that even those days he was writing in Bengali about the social sciences related to social group. And I'm very happy that he has continued to write in Bengali throughout. Uh, because he told me that, but many other friends also told me that he was writing, and Tapi gave us that he wrote a last book on the museum. It's a wonderful kind of a thing that we have. So we have a very mixed kind of memories about this. I distinctively remember that we must have talked several hours together. Like last in 2017, I came to Kolkata. I had some other work, but I made a point that if he's there, I will accept it, otherwise I won't come. He was there, so we spent about 4 to 5 hours together. And 2018, he came to Surat. At present, I live in Ahmedabad. I went there and we spent time together because we were just uh, very anxious to meet as frequently as possible. In fact, 3 months back, I had a talk with him on telephone about Bengal elections and that kind. We used to talk about politics and many other kind of things. But nowhere, I think, we gossip on any individual. We talk about events. What we talk about the political processes, but not the individuals' uh, uh, gossips of personal likings and disliking kind of. And that was the great quality of Pradeep. We were interested largely on that. In 2011, I was in Shimla, and he happened to come there for some workshop. And he found out that I was there. So he made a point to meet, but unfortunately I was not there. He made it a point to meet my wife. He postponed his journey, met my wife uh, on dinner. That was the affection. So when I heard this news, uh, not me, but my wife and even my children, even the grandchildren, do remember uh, Pradeep. And we have sweet memories of those days. I share my condolence, my wife and to Sukla and Tapti and the center. And we will remember and cherish the memories for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Shah. Um, I will now ask a very old friend of Pradip Das, Dipankar Gupta, who I believe was a student at JNU at the same time as Pradipda was a student there. Um, to speak next is Dipankar here. Uh,
Here I am.
yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I've known Pradeep for many, many years. Practically, well, 1/5 of my life was without Pradeep, and 4/5 was. And we met as students in Delhi University. Uh, and Pradeep was, how should I put it, a very fun-loving and also a bit of a prankster in those days. And some of us feared his pranks, and I remember some of them, but perhaps this is not the occasion to talk about those. Pradeep and I, we bonded over several things, but the one thing we didn't bond over was music, because I'm tone deaf, and Pradeep was exceptionally gifted in that area. But he'd do his best to culture me up and take me to Shankar Lal Festival. And I remember being dragged there on cold winter nights. But Pradeep used to sit through the entire session very, very assiduously, attentively. And I kept looking at him, wondering what he was hearing. Of course, he told me that my ears had to be corrected in order that I can live a life more complete and fulfilling. Pradeep and I, of course, I mean, when you think back, there's so many memories. Yes, of course, we did. I learned a lot from him, especially in the field of agrarian sociology and rural classes. But I'll come to that later, because I remember Pradeep primarily as a person with whom I had a lot of fun. We laughed a lot together. We did all kinds of things, and especially when Shukla was in Calcutta and my wife was in Delhi, we'd probably, I think I lived in their home for months in Surat. In Delhi too, I remember once we decided to have a beer binge, and we bought beer, but the beer was quite hot. So I kept it in the fridge. It's not cold enough, so I put it in the freezer. Eventually, when we got to drinking it, the beer was solid ice. So we had to warm it up to drink it. And I remember Pradeep saying this is the first time he's warmed up beer to drink it. It was really fun, thinking back about those times. And yes, he was not only just a good cook, he also knew where good food was available. Past 15 years or so, I had occasion to go to Calcutta practically once or twice a year, once a year at least. And every time Pradeep was there for me, and we spent the entire time together. And he used to take me to restaurants. Some of them were not so well known, probably, but I must tell you, the food was excellent. So he's obviously, he knew his food very well. I know about his cooking, as Papi said, because in Surat, very often I ate in their home when Shukla was away. And Pradeep was really quite an accomplished cook even in those days. On a old-fashioned stove, he made quite a few things. Surat, as you know, and Kansham Bhai will probably not know about this because he's a vegetarian, but Surat is quite a paradise for fish. And Pradeep and I used to go to the fish market. When he moved to his second home, the first home was different. The second one was very close to a fish market. And we used to spend quite a lot of time over there together. And he was, of course, very good at distinguishing different kinds of fish, and that helped me a lot. But yes, he was a good cook, and he also knew where good food was available. And going to Calcutta for me was actually going to meet Pradeep. All said and done. I mean, there were all kinds of other reasons, of course. Some of them are quite high sounding. But I really went there to meet him. And it seemed to me that he was always happy to meet me, because he'd just drop everything and we'd be together the entire day. And only late night he'd pack up and go home, only to meet up again next morning. Calcutta for me was Pradeep. We did all kinds of things together, nothing remarkable, just walking up and down the streets, going to coffee shops, talking about this, that, and the other. And Pradeep was a very good judge of people, by the way. He never ever talked about other people, quite true, but sometimes he used to comment on their foibles. And it was just one or two sentences, but he got to the core of the matter. And I found that very interesting and used to have a good laugh about these things because he was so unpretentious as a person, so completely unpretentious as a person that, when he said something about anything, it was absolutely transparently authentic. There's no doubt about that. When I came to Surat, and I came to Surat, by the way, Ghanshyam Bhai knows this. I came to Surat soon after Pradeep joined. And of course, I came to Surat because of Pradeep. He told me about Surat and said that, you haven't got a job and nobody will give you a job. But people here are very understanding and generous, and you might just be able to sneak in. And I did sneak in with the help of Ghanshyam Bhai and Professor Desai. And I think that year I spent in Surat with Ghanshyam Bhai, Professor Desai, and Pradeep were really very remarkable for me. It is not the length of time, but the depth of time, perhaps. The things we did together, we used to just shoot off and go to villages for trips of various kinds. I remember going to a district called Old Pad, and I was a bit hesitant to go there to study dairy farming. I didn't know much about dairy farming. But Ghanshyam Bhai said that, you will never know anything about anything unless you go there. So we used to just take off, and on some occasions, at least two occasions, Professor I.P. Desai loaned us his car, and I drove it very hesitantly, didn't want to bang into anything. But that was Surat, if you want to do something, there was no formality there. If you want to do something, go ahead and do it. And the center stood behind you. And Ghanshyam Bhai told you about his attachment to various research projects. But Pradeep really introduced me to rural sociology. Prior to that, I didn't know very much about rural sociology or rural society, in fact. I was studying urban India, Bombay at that, or Mumbai. But Pradeep was the one who really introduced me to that. And Surat was where I cut my teeth on that subject. And later on, of course, I became very involved in agrarian sociology. And if I were to trace the genealogy of that involvement, I must confess, without any hesitation, that reading about rural Birbhum in Pradeep's dissertation, thesis, and discussing with him on various issues did draw me into that area. And I stayed with it for a very long time. I still indulge it from time to time. But yes, Pradeep was a person, and also Pradeep was the person who introduced me to philosophy. I used to talk to him about social theory, Parsons and Merton and Amitai Zioni and the rest of it. But he was also well tuned into Western philosophy, and he gave me a few books. I remember when we were students in JNU in Delhi, he loaned me a few books on philosophy. And then he was also the person who introduced me to some aspects of Indian philosophy, primarily the Charvaka system. And I have always been grateful to him for that. And I would not have otherwise perhaps gone into it in the way in which Pradeep wanted me to embrace that subject. But for me, Pradeep was, of course, an intellectual companion, no doubt about it. But he was such a good friend. And that is what I missed the most. We used to also argue about things. For example, I didn't quite get along with his views on contemporary postmodern philosophy. I had a very different position on that. And we used to argue about it in a friendly fashion. And we always ended up in finding something to laugh about. And that's how most of our discussions ended. And then we moved on to something else, which was probably just pure fun. Pradeep was really full of, he was a man who had a lot of energy in him in terms of involvement with the frivolous, and he made the frivolous so intimate. And I liked that part very much. I don't think I'll ever have a friend again with whom I could let my hair down and be as silly as possible and yet be appreciated. To have that kind of friend, I think, is a joy forever. And losing Pradeep is losing that anchor in my life. And I really regret it very, very much. And Tapi and Shukla, I mean, Tapi will not know, of course, she was born when we were in Surat together. But Pradeep, Tapi, and Shukla are so important to us at a very difficult and critical point in our lives. And I should be grateful to all three of them for all the friendship they've given us. And Pradeep, I really miss you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deepankuda. Thank you. We have Professor David Hardiman, historian and also another colleague of Pradeep Das from Surat, who is supposed to speak next. Are you here?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. The name that's come up is actually my granddaughter's. I think she was doing her homework on my computer, and somehow I don't know how it's happened. These things have a life of their own, but it's come up. But it is me anyway. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was obviously, really upset to hear about the death of Pradip, particularly, how it's happened due to this. The COVID epidemic, which has caused us such heartache over the last year and a half for all of us, and a lot of unfortunate, a lot of people have died. Who one knows. As I said, I have very warm memories of Pradip. We were almost sort of contemporaries at Surat almost the entire times. We happened to be. He went to, I think, in 1977. I really was there as a full-time presence from really 1980, when I was beginning to work on the research, which became the coming of the Devi book, and he left just the year before I did, which was I left in 1989. So we spent a lot of time there together. When I'd arrived, the new centre had just been built. I mean, I remember well the old centre, because I used to visit. I think my first visit was in 1972 or so, when I was doing research on a rather different part of Gujarat. So I knew that the old centre, which is very cramped, and the new centre was a beautiful building. It was, of course, as Ghanshyam has told us, quite a low-cost building, and it didn't last, unfortunately, and it began to crack up, which was a real shame, because it was a beautiful building for all of us to live in. And there was a very good community there, a really good community, and Pradip was right at the heart of that community. Ghanshyam has mentioned our tea breaks every day, which went on for a long time in the afternoon, but they were good. We really got to know each other very well. We got to know, our intellectual interests, our various foibles, what we like to eat, what we thought about, the latest state of the Indian cricket team and so on. Very wide ranging, as I say, and it was always good fun. And he always had a lot to say, and very good sort of witty comments, but also if anybody made rather dubious statements or ones that didn't have much sort of solid intellectual base, he would demolish them, but very, very nicely, very, very in a very good-humoured way. And he was always very, very good-humoured person to be with. And it was a very good time, and it was a small group of people, but we all knew what each other were doing. We used to visit each other's research, and Deepanka Gupta has mentioned IP Desai's car, the IP mobile, as we called it, who used to lend it out freely, and we used to travel around in it to all over Gujarat. And there were a lot of interesting things going on. I was doing research on Adivasis, and Pradip was too, Bengali Adivasis, of course. But we were able to discuss a lot of the sort of theoretical elements of that, and he helped me a lot to understand, many aspects of that. you know, the IP Desai was still alive up until 1985, the founder director of the Calcutta Centre. I mean, sorry, the Surat Centre. I'm muddling them up. And he was a fantastic presence to have. I think he you know, created a lot of the culture of the centre, that that camaraderie, the love of food. I mean, IP was a lover of mitai and particularly surti, mitai and bhujan and farshan, etc. And Pradip brought his own love of Bengali food, which I always interested to hear the difference between cooking Karela shak in Gujarati style with the Bengali Karela. And you know, it was good to have that sort of whole culture of food. I remember he actually Dipankar mentioned the fish market in Bengal, and I remember one thing he really loved was the fact you could get hilsa very, very cheaply and good quality hilsa in Surat. And this was it happened because of the Ukai Dam on the Tapi River, which had been built just before he came, and was finished just before he came, creating this reservoir. And they stocked it with hilsa, and it was easily obtainable in Surat as a result. And he really relished that, of course, and it made his sort of exile from Bengal a bit more manageable. And music too. I remember he visited America and came back with a pile of LPs, classical LPs. We were, of course, rather starved of Western classical music or access to it in Surat in those days. And I remember he lent me his collection, and I duly recorded it on old style cassette recorder, and was able to listen to it on my own equipment, which I you know, really appreciated. So there are many very, you know, good things, and he was a really good presence to always have in Surat at that time. Unfortunately, after I left and he left, we didn't manage to meet up very much. I remember meeting him in London when he visited one time in the 1990s, but I was based in Britain after that, and unfortunately haven't been able to visit Calcutta subsequently. My trips to India have been rather short, and had to either be in Gujarat or for doing research, or perhaps in Delhi for a conference or whatever. But so we didn't actually manage to keep up too much. But you know, he was such a strong presence at that time for me. It's a very good time, a good time for all of us, I think, who were there then in the late 70s, 80s. You know, it meant so much. I really was devastated when I received this news of his death. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Hardiman. May I call upon Satyakam Joshi, who is...
Yeah, very much. Thank you. Yeah.
Please
can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And really, on behalf of Center, we are very much sorry to hear the demise of Professor Bose. As Dipankar Ghanshyam-bhai, Dipankar Gupta, and David Hardiman has already spoke about Pradip's interaction at Surat and his life at Surat. In fact, when I joined Center at around 86, mid 86, and Professor Bose left in 87. So we had only 1.5 years together. But within that 1.5 years, we had a very fond memory of Professor Bose. And particularly, as Ghanshyam Bhai has pointed out, that we had formed a Center for Social Study cricket team. And Pradip Bose used to be with us, and we had a series of cricket match outside the center with the city team. And Bose Saab and Gunalekar Saab and Sudhir Saab, they were all distinguished professor, and we were all PhD scholar, and some of the administrative staff and some peon. So we together form a 11-person team, but we never felt that they are professor and we are very PhD scholar or peon or any account clerk or something. So he was such a excellent human being. So he used to mingle together so very well with each other. And as far as academic is concerned, his work, particularly Ghanshyam Bhai and Professor Bose work on the stratification of among tribal of Gujarat and North Bengal, and that has basically given a lot of credit to center also, and that has also helped government to formulate policy on tribal, particularly the economic differentiation. In fact, K.N. Singh also, great Professor K.S. Singh also mentioned that this is one of the important academic contribution by Professor Ghanshyam Bhai Shah and Pradip Kumar Bose. And still in our study, we still quote frequently. Another very interesting aspect of Professor Bose for building our center, that in 1982, this was our center was the first to introduce a computer. And Pradip Kumar Bose was the instrument in bringing, and in those days, computer was in a 8x8 room. It is a very big computer, and that Bose Sahab used to handle that entire thing. And he has written a book on the use of computer in social science in those days, where they used to taught Fortran and basics, and he introduced Fortran and basic in the entire this thing. And later on, Bose Sahab only started uh, computer training for research methodology and social special package for social science, that is SPSS. And that legacy still we continue. In fact, last month only we have completed our 37th training course on the research methodology, and that legacy has basically started by Bose Sahab, and still we have continued. And with regard to all three distinguished professor mentioned about Tea Corner, I remember when 2018 he came to Surat. As soon as he entered to center, he immediately asked me, "Tea corner hai kya nahi?" So he was so fond of Tea Corner and very nostalgic about the memories we attach with our Surat city. So he requested that I would like to visit the area, Kanpura area, where they used to stay, and we had a old premises of center. We went there, and to my surprise, he found out one Parsi gentleman. He had a very close connection with that Parsi gentleman, and they spoke for more than 1 hour about their memories for 1980, 81. So he was a very gem of a human being, very philosophically also very, very rich in philosophy, and we still follow his writings very much in our academics also. And whatever center, what Ghanshyam is saying about Lori Baker architect, now that absolutely, because of the low cost housing, now no, not a single house is on that Lori Baker design. We have revamped the entire thing, and now new building has come up. When Bose Sahab visited Surat, he was very disappointed because that old buildings were dismantled. But he was so enthusiastic and so fond of that. At present, very few people who knew Bose Sahab. But when 2018 he came, we in fact invited his old colleague also, and we had a very nice meeting with him. So I am really thankful to his family member also that Bose Sahab was with us, and he could able to develop our center. His contribution was immense in our developing our CSS. And thank you very much for giving me opportunity to speak, and also to hear Tapti. And Tapti, when we received more than 35 condolence messages. So we sent to Tapti messages, and he wrote back to me about that. I was very moved with the whole messages, and definitely. So I'm also very much thankful to Tapti and Professor Mrs. Bose for remembering. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Joshi. Um, is Professor?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, is Professor Gopal Guru here? He's
Yes,
Professor-
yes,
yes.
I'm here.
Hello, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks for asking me to be the part of this condolence meeting. Many people have talked about, shared the memories about Pradeep. I also have some very, very unique memories of Pradeep. Pradeep, I just couldn't believe the news that that was shared by Satyakam, that Pradeep is no more with us physically. I couldn't believe because I was with him in a webinar just a few months back when Ritu actually organized this seminar on a book. I and Sundar Sarkar wrote a book on the idea of social. So he was present there in that webinar, and I will come back to that intervention of Pradeep. Absolutely brilliant intervention. But I think what we have to remember about Pradeep is basically many things. His love for food, his love for music, his theorization of food and music, all that is well taken. And that actually was also unknown to me. Thanks, Tapati, for sharing that with all of us. Actually, he actually showed a very multifaceted personality, and he was actually I'm starting from food to Plato is something which is amazing journey. No one can really imagine, and I wish he should have stayed for another 10 years more. So anyway, but we just can't. It's beyond our control. Pradeep, I met Pradeep several times through seminars and webinars, and also personally. When Pradeep left center in '87, I joined the Center for Social Studies Surat immediately after he left, and I was there for a brief while. But he used to come to center for taking courses in methodology. So I used to meet him and see what talk to him closely about issues that were of common concern, both social and academic. So what I distinctly remember is this one quality which is so rare in our society, that he was genuinely a human being. Was a human being with a smile. The smile, Namyoda spoke about smile, but smile, Pradeep's smile was without mask, absolutely original. And so there was no mask on that smile. And this smile was so important for people to actually build up their own confidence in seminar rooms. That they would look at him and start speaking. I think Ritu will know this, and his students will endorse this. And so the smile would actually tell us that look here, it is not argument, it is the affective that should proceed. To put simply, it is not philosophy, but ethics that should proceed. That should proceed and proceed. So the quality that Pradeep had was he was generous socially, also in cognitive manner. He would actually give good suggestions. He will also criticize with a smile. As David has pointed out, he would demolish is not the right word, but he would build up your argument. So that quality is very rare. I mean, humility or maybe human being and philosophy normally do not go together. Actually, so there's a tension between the two. And he actually was one person who actually eliminated the tension. You have to be a good human being, then only you can be a philosopher or a theorist. So that is one lesson one learns from Pradeep. Pradeep had this distinct quality that we have to learn from. The other point I thought I should share with all of you is that his scholarship, Dipankar spoke about his scholarship, and he actually opened up many new insights into how to study rural India. His two to three articles that appeared in EPW. Actually, I came to know about these articles. He wrote those articles in 81 or 82. 81 is caste riots in Gujarat. So he actually was situating the debate of caste and class in the larger debate that was happening. I think Ghanshyam Bhai and Dipankar were the part of caste class debate those days. It was very intense among the scholars from all destinations. So his articles on Gujarat and tribals were so fundamentally important to actually associate oneself with the larger debate, actually help us become the part of that status of the debate sometimes later. So I actually came to know about Pradeep's work when I was working on caste and class, and one couldn't escape the debate that was happening. Social mobility and class goes together, and violence has to be understood in terms of those who are hypermobile, the Dalits of Gujarat. They are the ones who are attacked by the upper caste in Gujarat. So, I think so that actually in a way formed that formulation formed the part of the larger debate that was happening about caste and class in that. So I think when we are actually going into the genealogy of this debate, you just can't escape Pradeep. Pradeep is there, and you have to take due recognition of Pradeep's contribution. Of course, about caste and class and stratification among the tribals of Gujarat and Bengal. Actually, we had a long discussion on caste in Bengal, and he would always encourage you to talk about caste in Bengal. Actually, it was really difficult to talk about it, but he spoke about caste and its connection with Buddhism. So that was a rare insight, I window to really look at the relationship between caste and Buddhism. But we couldn't have much a deeper discussion because our interactions and our connectivity was disrupted because of time lag. So that was his contribution to intellectual legacy that we have to keep in mind. Finally, I think I should talk about this webinar about this the everyday experience caste that I and Sundar Sarukai wrote, and Ritu organized this webinar in some months back. So I was actually we were talking about the book, and Pradeep actually was the first person to raise the hand, and he was just outstanding about how to define social. We were always confident that there's no challenge, and but he actually punctured our confidence and raising solid points. But he was also very nice to me. He actually made so many concessions. He didn't ask difficult question to me, but he asked difficult question to Sundar Sarukai. And I think it is recorded and you can see it. I think Ritu may be able to tell you. So I think what he was so up to date. He was so intellectually agile, keeping track of. And I'm happy that now that the book would be hopefully published on Plato, Freud, and Foucault. It would be very interesting. It is always very, very insightful to engage with Pradeep, even though he's not around us to answer certain questions. But his scholarship will always make you engage with him. And for that, for his human quality, for his scholarship, for his multifaceted personality, we should all remember him for years to come. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Gopal Guru. Thank you for being with us today. Parthoda, can I call upon you to speak next? Professor Partho Chatterjee.
Thank you. Various people have mentioned Pradeep's association with Surat and their memories of him. That's where I think I could begin, because in fact, I first met Pradeep in Surat. This was, I think, in 1985, probably 86. I was there for 3 or 4 days. I remember the place very well, extremely lively. Professor Desai was no more, but Ghanshyam was there. So was Arvind Narayan Das, David Hardiman, Pradeep. David, of course, being a foreigner, managed to get a liquor permit with which he kept everyone very happily libated in that parched land. And that's when I had long conversations with Pradeep. about his work. I discovered that he had studied physics in college, and then philosophy. He got an MA degree in philosophy, and then a PhD in sociology. And that, to some extent, explains the range, not just the range, but the amazing intellectual curiosity that Pradip always displayed. I also realized that when he was doing his fieldwork in Birbhum, and I think he lived in Shantiniketan, he got to know Binoy Ghosh, who is the very famous compiler of old Bengali periodicals from the 19th century. And that, I think, is where his great interest, his abiding interest in the old print literature of Bengal began. Uh, he moved to Calcutta, 88, yes, or 87, I think, 87. And ever since then, of course, I've been very, very close to him in all sorts of ways. Let me just mention 2 or 3 things about Pradip's institutional role. Professor Satyakam Joshi just mentioned his role in starting the or managing the computer in Surat. A lot of people at the center today, in the Calcutta center today, don't know that the father of computers at the Calcutta center was also Pradip. He was the one who first began, we first started, of course, as Professor Joshi just mentioned, in Surat, there used to be the old style computer where you actually had to punch cards and then process the results. That's the old computer before the PC came in. At the center, we first acquired a PC, I think 89, 90, somewhere thereabouts. There was only one machine, and Pradip managed the entire logistics of how various people would first learn how to use it and then actually get to use it. But what he did was he brought in his knowledge of computer programming into working out. Those days you did not have ready-made packages, the kind of thing you have for SPSS now. So Pradip actually compiled a manual, a handbook, for the use of the SPSS, the various statistical exercises that social scientists usually need to do by using the PC. And he actually published a book on this. There is actually a book. Now, of course, the utility of that book evaporated very quickly, because very soon, the more commercially minded programmers produced all of these ready-made packages. So now, of course, you don't need to write your own programs in order to do any of these exercises. But that was how Pradip first initiated the computer at the center. The second thing about the center, institutional, his amazing contribution in some ways, now looking back, was that once we had this association with the NRECA program from the late 80s and early 90s, it was a fairly modest amount in those days. It became larger over time. We were thinking of ways in which we might use that fund to create some kind of permanent acquisition for the center, rather than simply spend it on salaries for researchers and so on. And Pradip came up with the idea, because by then Pradip had already started his work in visiting various old libraries in Calcutta, looking for these old Bengali periodicals, and he knew of the terrible state in which these periodicals were lying there. And he kept coming back after every visit and saying, I may be the last person to look at these things, because these things are crumbling already. So what we decided was to begin a very small, modest attempt to microfilm some of these periodicals. We began with the Bongyo Sahitya Parishad, which is still the largest collection of old Bengali periodicals. We began there. Over time, that became a much, much larger project. And of course, we then moved into digitizing this whole collection. It's now publicly available. And of course, We then moved from textual archiving to visual archiving, and now, of course, the center's archive is a much, much bigger enterprise and very well known. Once again, Pradip was the founder. It was his brainchild initially. The other thing I will mention institutionally, again, people from Surat, Ghanshyam mentioned this. He was both experienced and well and also collegial enough to participate precisely in projects which did not have any intellectual appeal at all, but we needed to do them. So I remember, Pradip, we began with doing various resettlement projects for the government. So there are stories about this. So, we had to do this over 2 or 3 years at one point of time. Pradip was very much active in this. A lot of people, I don't want to go into Pradip's books because many of these are well known. I consider, apart from the books, both Bangla and English, there are a couple of essays which I find particularly interesting. One is, I think Omyoda mentioned this, his essay on the family, which first appeared way back in this book called Texts of Power. It was, I think, the first kind of Foucauldian, the use of the idea of Foucauldian discipline into the context of the 19th century family. And he made extremely interesting amendments to Foucault's method. And the other one was the essay on Durga Puja, which again is now actually quite well known. Again, trying to apply the idea of hyperspace, hyper reality. That Foucault, what was it called? Not dystopia.
Heterotopia.
Heterotopia.
Heterotopia, yeah.
Heterotopia. So that's what the idea. He called it Bikolpolok. So that was the other essay. Finally, there are lots of stories that one could tell about how one enjoyed his company and his incredible wit. Let me just give you one story, because many of those stories can't be repeated in this kind of gathering. But one story which comes from one of these workshops which we used to do at one time, the cultural studies workshop, where you had both senior faculty as well as a lot of young researchers who just completed their PhDs. And I remember in one of these meetings, there was a young, very bright participant who was always the first person to ask a question after every presentation. And he always began by saying, well, the speaker has said this, and this. We must first unpack these concepts. And he kept doing this several times through the day. And late in the afternoon session, Pradip was sitting next to me. He suddenly turned to me and said, have you noticed there's no room left on the floor? So I said, what do you mean? So he said, he's unpacked so much that there's no space left on the floor anymore. You better tell him not to unpack anymore because he won't have anywhere to put the stuff. So that's the kind of wit he would come up with. And one can go on repeating, instances of Pradip's very, very, sometimes quite acerbic wit. I don't want to go on any further because there are many other people who will speak. I have absolutely, the fact that one would miss him is just, it's really hard to believe that he's no more. But that's how it is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parthuda. I will now ask Pradip's older brother, Dilip Bose, who has joined us today at this meeting, to say a few words. Dilipda, are you there? Hello? Yes. Yes. Please, you need to unmute yourself and then we'll be able to hear you. Just একটু unmute করে দেবেন ওই লাল. Yeah. এই তো.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Center and Rosinga in particular, to invite me on this occasion. I really don't want to harp on his intellectual achievements or sociological achievement much. I'll rather speak as a brother and a friend, because I have mentioned to all my friends, relatives, and everybody who has come across me that he was not only a sibling to me, he was more of a friend. And that happened for one of the reasons is that a lot of our younger days, actually, after he passed out his post-graduation, and even I was by the time working already, we had a theater group in Delhi called Natokal. And there were common friends who he would call Tui, I would also call Tu, so that Tui also. And a lot of them are with us and still very friendly. Until Pradip passed away, were very friendly with Pradip also. So that made us more of a friend rather than only a sibling. And I must tell you in this platform that he definitely had a great sense of humor. And he was not only, he later on, much later, of course, I mean, his love for Western music was there. But as Dipankar mentioned, and some of us would know, in our younger days, we attended a lot of Indian classical music. That was Shankarlal Music Festival, which in our younger days was free. And if not free, in Delhi, as you know, people, whoever has a little contact can manage passes. So we would go, and it was not very far off from our house. We lived in the government quarters those days, and it used to finish at about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock early morning, and we'll walk back home. So those were the days. And Pradip, incidentally, I don't know whether a lot of us may not know, was equally knowledgeable and also a lover of, let's say, popular Indian music, that is both Bengali and more Hindi. In fact, Pradip probably had a very great collection of all early Devanand movies, which all been sort of mostly composer were Grace S.D. Burman. And Pradip's knowledge about whether S.D. Burman, Sholil Chaudhary, or even other Shankar Jaikishan was no less. In fact, in the month of March, I visited Calcutta to attend my nephew's wedding, much against my wishes, because though it was not the phase 2 of the pandemic, but phase 1 was also scary at our age, since I am older to Pradip by 4 years. And I was very much against making any travel arrangement at all. But everyone sort of almost forced me, blackmailed me, because they say Bado Mama, Bhagner BA, and things like that. So I finally decided to go. And now, hindsight, what I see that how happy he was to meet us. And we decided after the wedding to stay for an extra week in Calcutta, just to spend some time with Pradip. And of course, one of my other brother-in-law who has also got old. And how happy he was with us, how happy to spend time with us. And we listened to good music, and his collection of right from music of 40s, 50s, both Latin American, some English, Hindi, Bangla, and everything. And it was so much that my younger brother, who was also with me, requested Pradip ki er ekta copy amake diye dio. So yes, I'll make a copy and give it to you for your collection. But that was not to be. Pradip's shifting to, as Partho also mentioned, Pradip's, some of the writings in Bengali are, I would say, marvelous in the sense, firstly, that he's like all of us, we are Provashi Bangalis. We are mostly born and brought up in Delhi. and a sizable of our life we have lived in Delhi. So formally that way, yes, we went to a school where Bengali was taught, but that was since we were science students. It was only up to 7th or 8th standard minimal. But yes, the atmosphere or the environment around the house was pretty much Bengali literature, Bengali music. And here I must mention, I can see Mandira Mitra has joined us. Mandira is a well-known advocate in Delhi. And her mother was a very honorable teacher for both me and Pradeep in the Raisna school. And we owe a lot to her for, by exposing her to this kind of a culture. I must thank Mundira here personally, because she is not only a reputed lawyer here, and husband is one of the topmost journalists of India, Dr. Manoj Joshi, I must mention. So Mandira's mother, like some of our own parents and all, have been instrumental in sort of guiding us to that kind of a culture. But later on, when he went to Calcutta, he definitely made a lot of effort to write, pick up the subjects which are not very common. And I think he wrote some beautiful essays and nonfiction in Bengali, one of the few. I'm not mentioning only about his Western music thing and all. Perhaps somebody else also mentioned, as far as Western classical music's the book which he has written. That's probably the only book in Bengali, as far as I know, on the Western classical. I have read, or even Pradeep, I think in one of his interview mentioned, and before this book was, by the way, published by Karigor, it was lying with Ananda Publisher for a long time. And unfortunately, Ananda Publishers were dilly-dallying for what? And actually, Pradeep got a little fed up, because we had a lot of discussion before he started writing this book. Because he once mentioned, lekhar to ichhe to ache, kintu kojon podbe and all. But anyway, Ananda dilly-dallied a lot, and finally, I am glad that Karigor did publish, because this is perhaps the only book I have read or have come across in classical Western music. We have all read maybe a few, essays by Satyajit Ray and Nirod Chaudhary. That's about all. I have not read any, and as far as I know, nobody has written any book on that. So that's definitely a big achievement. And I will also, I think Tapti has really summed it up very well and all. His sense of humor, he definitely was a foodie. I mean, whenever we went to Calcutta, except this time, there must be some, eating out, some specific places or at home. But this time it was only at home, though we were staying separately in his other flat only. So we would make ourselves something, spend the time, listen to the music. And he had a great sense of humor, no doubt about it. And as I think somebody else mentioned about that, his observation about people, he normally would not speak much about them openly at all, but his observation was as sharp as anything. And he will sum it up maybe in one sentence, two sentences, and sometimes. That was a great thing, a great observer. And he definitely was not a, what should I say, Poroninda Porocharcha type, but his observation about people was great. His sense of humor was great. And for me, as I mentioned, that he was not a sibling, another great friend. For me, my visit to Calcutta will not be the same without Pradip. And for me, the life is also not the same without him. I will miss him dearly, but what can I say? And thank you once again for that. I don't want to carry on. Tapti has actually said much better than what I have done. I thank her. And obviously, I thank you, Rosinka, and the center for all of them, and all other friends. And I see a lot of friends whom I personally know here also. I thank them also too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dilipda. Thank you. I will now ask Prebin Karsong, who was Parthoda just mentioned Enrica and the collaboration between Enrica and the center. Prebin is supposed to join us from Copenhagen. Prebin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, please go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much, Rosinka. And I'm very happy and very grateful to have been invited also to pay tribute to Pradip, who was a greatly esteemed friend and colleague, and a person I respected very much as an inspiring and hardworking, productive scholar in the field of contemporary and historical sociology, and also as a modest, friendly and warm person with whom it was always a pleasure to be together with. Pradip was a very central person and a pillar of support for this project, Enrique project of collaboration that existed between the Calcutta Center and my university at Roskilde in Denmark and the Center for Basic Research in Kampala for a long time, for 17 years, between 1991 and 2008. And which had two strands of collaboration. One that was, its overall theme was political and cultural institutions and development. And within this theme, there were two strands of focus. One was urban culture and democracy, where Pradip and I were mostly active, and another one called institutional frameworks for industrialization. And the focus or the range of activities we collaborated around addressed researcher training, research collaboration, and development of research infrastructure. Some of the things that Professor Chatterjee talked about a little while ago. So central to this project was the training of PhD students. We trained a number of them successfully, most of them registered in Calcutta. And in the context of supporting that, running these researcher training workshops, which we did in both India and Denmark and Uganda, and where we had, especially in India, they became quite a well-known and thing, and particularly successful, and especially in the field of cultural studies, and became known as cultural studies workshops that were conducted annually for many years in different places in India, and where Pradip was an absolutely central person. And these workshops then involved presentations both from senior staff and discussion of readings that people had prepared in advance, and then presentations from the PhD students, and were really serious and hardworking academic events. And some of the presentations from those workshops were subsequently published, including, there were 3 volumes published on urban culture and democracy, edited by Pradip and my colleague and wife, Bodil Folke Fredriksen, one on politics in the city, one on family and gender, and one on forms of cultural production. And I think it was within one of those volumes that Pradip's paper on the discourse on the modern family in colonial Bengal, which I think was the one Professor Chatterjee referred to before, was first published, and which is a very nice essay which goes through an extensive range of 19th century Bengali publications, pamphlets, books, magazines, to show us how issues of family were discussed at the time, and how children, gender, and definition of women in terms of domesticity and family came to be talked about, and then applying this Foucauldian perspective also of describing how a medicalization of the family crept into discussions, and how issues of science and hygiene came to characterize debates. I mean, so it's a very nice piece, and which brings together these strands of discussion very well. And as Professor Chatterjee also said, this of course went hand in hand very closely with the building of the urban history archives at the Calcutta Center, and the building of this collection of books and magazine periodicals, literature and popular cultural materials, which then became part of the Hiteshrandraan Sanyal Memorial Archive, and is the core of what are now the collections held at Lake Terrace, and also of these now digitized archives that the center is looking after. And Pradip was very much a driving force in this, and I think also an important achievement to come out of this were the 2 volumes of Samayiki that he published of readings from old Bengali periodicals. 1 volume, the first volume coming out in 1998, which focused on science and society, 1850 to 1901, and a second volume on home and family, which I think came out only 10 years later, I mean, which was meant to have come out in 99, but was for some reason delayed. And I think there were plans for 3 more volumes to follow in the series, and I don't quite know what has happened to those plans. But in any case, I mean, so Pradip was a very prolific, very hardworking scholar, and covering a very wide range of research interests. And he was also a very dedicated and very much appreciated teacher, as I know from his students, a very loyal and supervisor, and somebody who was very supportive of his students and very much loved by them. And as many people have also said, I mean, Pradip was great company. He was a great raconteur, not least when discussing cinema. I mean, one favorite story that Bodil and I all remember was the one he told of having done field work on village film audiences, and being in this village where he every evening met with the same man who came to see the same film over and over again. And then one night Pradip asked him, why do you come to see this film again and again and again? And the answer was that at a central point in the film, the protagonists, a man and a woman, were just about to kiss each other. And just as they were about to kiss, a train would go past, so that you could not, the kissing could not be seen. And so this young man was coming back every night in the hope that tonight the train would be delayed, so that he would actually be able to see the kiss fulfilled. I mean, but I think that story is very typical also of Pradip's sense of humor, which was really lovely, and which made him such great company and so good to be with. So I still miss him very much, also as a friend and as someone to whom I felt quite close, and who also helped me personally finding a place to stay in Calcutta with relatives of his in January, February 2000, when I spent 2 months in Calcutta. So thank you very much for letting me contribute to this commemoration.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Prabin. It was good to hear from you. Roma Chatterjee, who is Professor of Sociology at Delhi University. Yes, Roma.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm not, that Asus is me. But anyway,
sure.
Something went wrong with my laptop, so I had to use this. Thank you, Rosinka, for inviting me to speak. I think it's come as a great shock to all of us, because I don't think anyone expected this to happen, even though the pandemic has been with us for a year and a half. I think I personally and several others from my department got to know Pradip Da quite well in the many years that he was advisor to our Center for Advanced Study in Sociology. at the Delhi School of Economics. It was clear that he was an institutional person. I think not only did he give us very good advice, he took his role really seriously as the UGC appointed advisor. And I think it's thanks to him in large part that the center was able to show success in its activities. He also was very interested in students. Clearly, he must have been in his own students, but I remember because we do have a very lively student community, he would always ask us to time the meetings that we had with him with the research scholars workshop that we also hold twice a year in the department. He would always stay back in Delhi to be able to attend the workshop and to give, I think, to participate very actively in the seminars that were being presented. He was very encouraging to younger colleagues, took a great interest in their work. Now, at that point, of course, I didn't know, for instance, about that very wide range of scholarship and academic interests that he also carried. I only got to know about that a little later on, I think, post my own headship, when I got to know him a little better elsewhere. But I think that says quite a lot about the kind of person he was, that he carried his scholarship so lightly. He was so unassuming, and I think far more interested in listening to the other than coming forth with his own opinions and his own comments, which is really quite remarkable, quite unusual also. Of course, there were glimpses that one caught even on very formal occasions about, I suppose, his wit and also his taste, his impeccable taste in food, because he took a great interest in the menus that we prepared. I mean, we're a department that loves its festivals. So we spend a lot of time worrying about menus and things. And he would take great interest and was very appreciative of the kind of effort that went into that kind of. He would always compliment us on the food, on the cook in the guest house, and so on. So I think you only caught glimpses of the kind of person he was, other than the fact that he was an extremely generous person. Um, I have to admit that I really only met him when he came to the department once a year. And that was an occasion that I think we all looked forward to. But I got to know him in another capacity almost 2 years ago, when I was invited to go to Calcutta, especially to act as a discussant for a paper that he had written. This is, again, a book that will be coming out soon on the Durga Puja, where his article was specifically on Durga Puja Kitch. And of course, he has this great interest in the Durga Puja and has written on it on many occasions. Here, of course, it was already a very philosophical piece because he was discussing Adorno, he was discussing Benjamin and several other scholars through it. And I think I saw another side to him then. He also sort of came in a kind of Foucauldian disguise, as he said. So I have to say, it took me a while to recognize him. He said, yes, now that I'm well into retirement, I can afford to let myself go. You know, his hidden personality could come out. And that evening we all went because we were staying in this very fancy hotel, I think the Lalit Great Eastern. And because I am a Probashi Bangali, I've been born and brought up in Delhi, it's just this way of also then taking us to Decker's Road, explaining the whole history of Decker's Road for some people who may not know. I guess this is the place where you could get possibly all the different kinds of foods, fast foods that are available in India within the space of less than a kilometer, probably. He explained the history of the place, its current status. You could also see the kind of field worker he must have been. This tremendous attention to detail. And I think knowledge for its own sake, because it wasn't as if he was going to pursue it academically, write about it, but that it was important to be a sociologist in life, not just as part of an academic career. He was also quite excited about the fact that there were 3 books that were going to come out at the next Pustak Boimala, which is a big landmark in Kolkata. It probably didn't happen because the pandemic overtook us soon after that. But I do hope the books have all, I think probably one of them has already come out. I look forward to the others and will make sure that we get them. I think he will be greatly missed, not just by his colleagues at his own center, to whom he must have contributed greatly, but I think to students and to scholars everywhere. He touched many people's lives because he was an institutional person, and there aren't enough people like him. So thank you again for allowing me to share my own appreciation and the appreciation of our department. We owe him a lot, and he will be greatly missed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roma. Thank you for joining us today. We come to now people who are at the center, were at the center. Actually, the center now is full of so many younger faculty that there are not that many left who actually shared a lot of time with Pradip Da at the center while he was there. So I will just quickly now ask Manush Rai, Professor Manush Rai, followed by Sugato Marjit, Tapati Ghosh Thakurta, Bodhisattva Kaur, Abhijit Bhattacharya, and Anirban Dash to say a few words about their friend and colleague. Manushta?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I cannot see you though.
I don't know how to make me seen though.
Okay.
What should I press?
It is a small sign with a video camera image, the image of a camera. If you can just
Click on it.
If just tap, just click on it. It must have a red line through. You just need to click on it to make that active. On the bottom left-hand corner of the box, there is a microphone sign and there is a video camera sign. You just need to click on the video camera sign if you can.
Well, I can't see any such, but let me talk nonetheless.
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah,
let me talk nonetheless.
Sure.
You see, I heard of Pradip Da when I was a student at JNU Sociology. My teachers used to talk about him. And then after my MPhil, I left JNU and was outside the country for a few years. And just before coming back, I was intimated by my wife of a small classified ad seeking fellows at CSSSC. So I just shot off an application. And very soon after being here, I got the interview letter. So I pulled up all courage and actually went to the center and met Pradip Da and gave him 2 articles that were forthcoming in EPW. Our meeting was very short. He just said, just keep it on the table, and I left. So I thought to myself that maybe he didn't take it as the right ethical gesture. So when I went for the interview, it was with a lot of trepidations. Professor Omio Bakchi was chairing it because he was the director then. The experts had already asked their questions. Now the subject, from the expert from the center, which was Pradip Da's turn to ask questions. But he remained silent. And then Professor Bakchi actually urged him, Pradip, kichu jigesh koro. And he sort of, those who know the gestural pattern of Pradip, they would realize this. He just twisted his arm, felt so shy, and asked me something, and I gave the answers to the extent I could. I narrate this event to bring out a central trait of Pradip Da, as I knew him. His extremely self-effacing, trait. Like he wouldn't go around looking for fellowships abroad. He wouldn't trumpet what he has written. always keeping himself at the back. Then after a few days, when I wasn't receiving any letter from the center, I already had a job and another job offer, but I kept waiting keenly, because those of us who were in college in the 70s and later on also would realize what I am saying. That center to us was, as I would call it, Jobone Nilpotto, the blue lotus of youth. And I was so keen to join. So one day, finally, the appointment letter came, and I very soon joined. And towards the evening, the floor attendant came to my room and said, "Pradip Babu apnake dekechen." So I felt very scared. I thought the real interview would begin now. I had done MA and MPhil in sociology and bid goodbye to it. So as I climbed the stairs, I was trying to brush up my knowledge of stratification, custom class, and all those things, structural something. I went to his room, and there actually started an interview, but not of the kind I thought. In retrospect, I know that was, a kind of aptitude test that he was giving me, at the end of which he said, "Ki korcho aaj? সন্ধ্যাবেলায় কি করছো?" I shook myself, said, "না, কিছু তো তেমন করার নেই." বলে, "ঠিক আছে, চলো." We took a cab and we rushed towards Park Street. That would be the beginning of some 500 repetitions. And I vouch for it. I have done a rough calculation over 30 years of our friendship. We went to a place at Park Street, a particular hideout of ours, where we would go on and on for 20 years, just the two of us. And later on, we moved to Central Avenue. Now, many people have expressed curiosity about our quote unquote nightlife. So this is the place to very quickly explain what it was that made us talk and talk and talk for hours together. We had to follow certain principles of Adda, and I hope Dipesh is listening to this. First principle was never be in a hurry to go back, which we were not. Second principle was with malice to one and all. But mind you, malice, no venom involved. Third principle was on our way back, two of us took two different routes, but both of us crossed Exide building near Ravindra Sadan. Change your motto. And the next motto is with love to one and all. And you are adda committed to forget everything that was talked and laughed at, and the next day is another beginning. So Pradipda, like to give you one instance, Pradipda had a lot of stories about the bank, the local bank he used to go. It was peak winter, and there enters, a tall lady, beautiful, dignified. My friend gives a stealth look. Obviously, it wasn't sort of reciprocated. A couple of months later, by March, Calcutta has started heating up. He happens to meet her on the way. She gives him a smile. Pradipda knows that the chemical process has started. April, it is even hotter. She again meets, when they meet again, she says, "Halo achen?" So Pradipda now knows that the chemical process is fully on. May, it is even hotter, and she stops him actually and says, "Onek din to dekhini." So Pradipda quickly goes past. And in June, when it is very hot, she actually, rebukes Pradipda, saying, কতবার বলেছি খাদিম কিনো না, শ্রীলেদার কেনো, এখন পস্তাও? Meaning, how many times haven't I told you, don't ever buy Khadim, buy Sri Leather. Now the West is yours. So this was the kind of stories. The fourth thing about Adda is that it is entirely coded. Adda evolves its own codes. Like few years back, 2 or 3 years back, I was waiting for him at our particular hideout on Central Avenue. We were supposed to meet, I clearly remember, at 4. And both of us were, observed the time with religious kind of devotion, but Pradipda was late by 15-20 minutes. As he rushed in and pulled the chair, he said, "Ar bolo na, ব্যাংকে বৌদি এসে গেছে." So we both knew what ব্যাংকে বৌদি এসে যাওয়া is. That is, an attractive middle-aged woman employee has been transferred to the bank. As a result, all male colleagues, right from the branch manager to the junior most clerk, have so many questions. They're getting stuck at their work at every step, and they have to come and discuss, consult with us. And that brings us to the fifth and most important code, motto of Adda. Like in thinking, so also in Adda, political correctness is a killer. Because you already have the template, all that you have to do is to put the problem, and because you have the template, you immediately know the answer. Not being politically correct doesn't, of course, mean being politically incorrect. Others thrive in that limbo zone between political correctness and incorrectness. Pradipda's witticism was marvelous. And this would be my last episode. Once we went to Darjeeling for a conference, and we were given a welcome drink. And in the lounge was a German evangelist with some tribal disciples of his. So he sarcastically commented, "Didn't know that Calcutta professors drink too." It didn't take Pradipda a split second to answer, "What are you saying? আরে মশাই কি বলছেন? মদ না খেলে আমাদের প্রমোশন হয় না জানেন কলকাতার অধ্যাপকদের? What are you saying? If we don't drink, we don't get our promotions, all the teachers of Calcutta colleges and universities." The evangelist was shocked. He said, "Yes, don't you know that the excise money West Bengal government gets is exactly the same money it spends on the salaries of teachers of colleges and universities." So this was my Pradipta, my very own Pradipta. I have witnessed just one unpradipta-like trait about him, and that happened at the very end, his sudden departure. ব্যস্ত ছিলাম তাসের ঘরে প্রদীপদা, আমরা দুজন, রণে ভঙ্গ দিলেন কেন? Do you now expect me to wait for you alone in this empty ground? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manushda. সুগতদা, আপনি কি আছেন? প্রফেসর?
হ্যাঁ, আমি আছি। শুনতে পাচ্ছো?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, শুনতে পাচ্ছি। আপনার ভিডিও চলছে?
হ্যাঁ, ভিডিও চলছে।
Okay, good. Please go ahead.
As Rosinka has said that we are now this batch of people who are going to talk about Pradipda, where his colleagues for some time. And I was a colleague I was just counting the number of years. I started at the center in 97. So I believe when Pradipda retired in 2008, I think incidentally I was the director. Maybe it's in 2007 I became the director. So it's more like 11 years. And Pradipda was exactly about 10 plus years older than me. So when I joined Center for Studies in 1997, most of my colleagues were kind of seniors to me. And I knew, something about center, but not much, because my discipline was economics, and economics as a discipline in a way was distant from the general environment of center's engagement. Although Professor Umyo Kumar Bakchi and Professor Partho Chatterjee were instrumental in getting me over there. And I knew that there was a very well-known sociologist at the center by the name of Pradip Bose. So I remember that in the first week or before I joined the center, it was a Saturday. And my wife and I were at Park Street, not because of the reasons that Manusda and Pradipda used to venture to Park Street, but, and of course, I was a loner in the center because I never drank anything. So as I went, we were loitering on the streets of Park Street. We found Manusda and Pradipda getting out of, I don't recall that pub, but there is a pub. It was a Saturday as far as I can recall, and they were getting out of it. And I rushed towards them along with my wife to introduce them and to introduce my wife to two of my senior colleagues, Pradip Bose and Manus Rai. And Pradipda and Manusda were in very happy mood for obvious reasons, but they found that the stock has been completely depleted in that pub. So they were re-entering some other pub. And they said that, when I asked them, what are you doing here? They actually narrated the incident. And then that was it. So on Monday or Tuesday, I met Pradipda at the center. And one thing, it is not only that Pradipda had a man of great humor and great wit, but when he would be talking about something really funny, you might sort of laugh your heart out, but he would talk it with a very straight face, which means that you try to feel whether it is something very serious he's talking about. So he said a very interesting thing to me. And in fact, I became a fan of Pradipda from that day on. He said that ki tomake chakri korte aste diyeche ekhane. I could not realize that what Pradipda was talking about. But then immediately it struck me. What Pradipda was actually meaning is that because my wife, after I went home, said that, how come you can work in that place where these two very elevated professors, researchers, are actually looking for pubs, and they are very, kind of so open-minded about it. So he was saying, je amader dekhe tomake okhane aste diyeche, কাজ করতে দিয়েছে তাহলে. And I was so, in fact, because I never had such an interaction with Pradipda before. Pradipda was a senior sociologist. I was a junior person, although I was a professor then. But Pradipda, in his first conversation with me, made me a friend of him. And he was such an easy person to talk to. One thing that I think Dipankar Gupta has already stated, a man with such knowledge and with such intuitive mind was also a man who was very easy to talk to, was completely unpretentious. And we had real adda from time to time, and had got nothing to do with academics, but all sorts of things, films, music, whatever. And whenever Pradipda would make a comment, his comment would be, you have to really have to have, sort of ears and eyes to realize what the comment was all about, because he is going to use his wit, his humor in a very subtle way. And in fact, that is one of the traits that Pradipda, would remain a very attractive personality so far as my experiences are concerned. The second point about Pradipda, of which I think many of you have actually talked about, but let me tell you in the language of an outsider, because I did not know much about Pradipda's academic background. I have looked through some of his work, but not really read much of it. But one interesting issue about my experience about Pradip in an outside world was that between 2011 and 2013, for 2 years, I used to work for the government of West Bengal as their chairman of the Higher Education Council. And also for a year and a half, I was at the vice chancellor of the Calcutta University. Whenever I went to a sociology department, you know, for lecturing, for some sort of inauguration, for something, and in my own sociology department in Calcutta University, conferences and various kinds of events, you know, for me, my sort of the nearest acquaintance with a celebrated sociologist was always Pradip Bose, because he was my colleague for 11 years. And I did not waste any opportunity to ask people like, you know, and they would come up with this, that, you know, whenever they would talk about center, because I was a professor at the center for a long period of time, still technically with the center till the end of this year, they always remembered and with Pradip with such respect, and always talked about his work that has influenced them, particularly young sociologists. You know, the ultimate acid test for the longevity and the depth of someone's work as an academic is the extent to which he actually influences young minds. In fact, I must say that, you know, my experiences always have been that these young sociologists are really influenced by Pradip's work. And the last point, which I would just finish up with, is the fact that his writing of serious research work in Bengali in a language that is so transparent and so visible and is understood by many, and his relentless effort not to dilute the content, but, you know, to explore very deep sociological research in terms of Bengali language is what really fascinates me, because I am an avid lover of that kind of work in economics. I think that Bengali language has all the potential to have this kind of explorations and adventures. And I would say that Pradip would be remembered as a great scholar because he actually used this language, his mother tongue, in this particular way. And I think that is really a memorable and long-term contribution of Pradip Bose. So we will miss him. And it was very early for Pradip. Even at 75, I would say that Pradip had everything that should have got him going for at least, you know, 10 more years. But what can we do? But I'm very happy that Rosinka has organized this, and I could learn so much about Pradip from his daughter, from his elder brother, and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shugotoda. We will, in fact, be hearing from a couple of younger sociologists after a few minutes. Taupatidi, will you be speaking for even if very briefly? Taupatidi was hesitant because she was saying there's a long list of people waiting to speak, but I'm hoping that she is here today.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, Rosinka, when you asked me to speak, I did say yes. But then I began to, when you shared the long list, I said there's so many people here waiting to speak. So I will be very brief. I'll just begin by saying that these are very cruel times we are living in. And I'm no longer shocked when I hear of the passing away of a close associate, a family member, a very dear friend. It no longer comes as a shock or a surprise, but each news of the death of a known person to this dreaded virus brings back memories, and it still is very painful. So I do believe that over a year and a half that we've lived with this now, we've not been inured to grief, really. And I hope we never will be. So when I first heard that Pradip was in hospital and unwell, I have not been in touch with him for a while. I actually, many of you will know, I said, let me not know anymore because, you know, one is surrounded by this news all the time. So I chose to opt out of the regular exchange of news, hoping that, you know, as with many, many people who do recover, that there would be something positive. But when the news came, I must say that what I remembered was only a person full of fun and friendship. And when I joined the center, lots of people have talked about it in the end of '89. Pradipta was one of my senior colleagues. Unlike many others at the center, I had not known him before. So when I had been a student at the center, I was one of the RTP students. There were some people who had taught me and they were still there at the center. And then there were friends like Anjun, who I had met through work at the National Library. And it was Anjun who introduced me to Pradipta. So in a way, it's hard to remember Pradipta without remembering Anjun too. They were the two sociologists at the center. Anjun was a friend and he introduced us to Pradipta. They used to all be on the floor above me. I was on the floor in Jadunath Bhavan, which is now the library, and I shared it with one of Pradipta's very close friends, Ronavita. I must say that as young people at the center then, we were a bit terrified by our younger senior colleagues. But it's people like Anjan, Pradipta, Parthada, who ultimately made us part of the gang. It took time. Being a woman at the center wasn't easy then, I'll have to say that. Now it's a place where women dominate in a very different way. So, but nonetheless, so our rite of passage was when we were invited to have lunch with them at Uditi at 2 o'clock. Now that our lunchtime hour was entirely set by the fact that till then there were meals being served, after that tiffin. So that is when gradually we became part of the gang and the conversation. But I must say the best times with Pradipta, the most memorable times were spent not at the center's Adda. The center was a place of a lot of fun and conversation. I remember Pradipta and Anjan being among the best dressed men, most dashing, wearing colorful shirts, not Anjan, but Pradipta wearing colorful bush shirts and long hair. But the fun times with Pradipta really were outside the center at the many addas, at the houses of friends like Tapti, Rai, who's the one who told me that Pradipta's daughter is also named Tapti, and I had not known another person, but he said it comes from his Surat days. So it was at Tapti's house, a regular adda place, sometimes at Ronabidda, sometimes at mine, sometimes at Amitav Ghosh's house, a great place for adda, and then of course at the cultural studies workshops. They were really memorable times, and they are not occasions to talk about here, but as I told Rosinka, if someday we can all physically get together again, I think we can spend hours remembering those stories. So when I heard the news, the first thing I thought of were the names he would give people. So, and they were unmatchable names. And today, I can only remember those names. Often I cannot even remember the actual names of those people. So there was a Golap Phool, there was a Choto Bhai, you know, to name a few, there was a Laje Agun, you know, I could go on and on. But it's amazing how over the last few days, I've been remembering Pradipta only with funny stories, which I've been sharing with Renalini, who actually as a child used to attend those parties and remembers Pradip Mama as people who would be asking her questions. And she remembers him getting regularly drunk. So, and she was telling me that at one party, she actually told Pradip Mama that, "Tumra ar mad kheo na, karon tumra baranda theke pore jete paro." The reason was there was a gentleman who then lived opposite a house in Salt Lake who'd actually fallen off the veranda. Mrinalini would have been what, about 3 or 4. And she had the sense that the moment you had a drink, there was a tendency you could fall off. So she was remembering those stories. And when a filmmaker died, very renowned filmmaker died recently, I was reminded about another story. Pradipta had the sense that there were certain categories of films, he said, which are used for Lal Bajar police torch. Now, I don't want to name the film or the filmmaker, but it's amazing that how a sad occasion like the death of a filmmaker, very renowned, the first thing it brought back was that story of Pradipta's. And I had to explain again to Mrinalini how that category of the film came about. And these are unique Pradipta stories. They will remain with me. A personal debt to Pradipta, as I said, my associations with them were more of fun and friendship, less of academic mentorship. But Pradiptaর বাংলা সমাজতত্ত্ব চর্চা আমাকে একটা অন্য পথ খুলে দিয়েছিল. To put it briefly, that there are two writers that Pradipta made me read, who I would otherwise not have read with such seriousness. One, of course, was Nirmal Kumar Bosu. He made me read his work on Konark. In his Pradipta, I knew about the Hindu Samaj Gothan. I knew much less about his work on the Mandir. But there's another writer whom Parthoda mentioned, which is Binoy Ghosh. And I remember one of the very, very interesting conversations that I had with Pradipta was about this anthology of essays by Binoy Ghosh on Kolkata's Madhyabitto Samaj, called Metropolitan Mon, Kolkata's Mon, Metropolitan Mon. And today I pulled it out of my shelf again after so many years. But I think I bought that book because Pradipta told me, and I found it at the book fair and I picked it up. And it is an amazing book, and written in the 60s, around the time Nirmal Ghosh is writing his Kolkata Social Survey. And in a way, Pradipta introduced me to these two figures and their ways of thinking. One, of course, on a different area, but particularly Binoy Ghosh's works on Kolkata are things that remain with me after all these years. I'll end by my last meeting with Pradipta, which was actually just before the lockdown. So I lost contact with Pradipta. I had not met him, and once I told him, যে আপনি কেন আসেন না আমাদের এত সেমিনার হয়, দোদলার ভবনে হয়, আপনাকে তো পাঠায়। And he, in his inimitable style, said, তোমরা সন্ধ্যেবেলার কিছু আয়োজন করো, তাহলেই তো আমি আসবো, 3টে থেকে 5টা আসবো, চা খেয়ে চলে যাবো, এগুলো হয় না। So this was the standard thing, যে তোমরা যেদিন সন্ধ্যেবেলার আয়োজন করবে আমি চলে আসবো, তার আগে সেমিনার হোক, যত খারাপই সেমিনার হোক আমি চলে আসবো। কিন্তু সেই সন্ধ্যের অধিবেশনটা আমরা করে উঠতে পারিনি তখন। The last time I met him was in March 2020, just before it would be 15 days later that we would go into lockdown. So we were together at a career advancement scheme promotion in Jadavpur. And much to my delight, I found that the other expert there was Pradipta. And we spent a wonderful afternoon in that day. We were in the convocation hall of Jadavpur University, and I kept looking at the bus, the white bus, and said, I have an interest in statue. And Pradipta and I laughed about some of those buses and who they belong to. But there's something that Pradipta told me that remains with me. I had just retired, or you could say I was retired, because we were not allowed to work for an additional 3 years, which some of us thought may come our way. So Pradipta said, এসব নিয়ে এখন ভেবো না, বিশ্বাস করো, retirement is the best time. He said, retirement is the best time, ইচ্ছে মতো বই পড়বে, চুপচাপ বাড়িতে বসে লেখাপড়া করবে, সেন্টার নিয়ে আর পড়ে থেকো না, এখন রিটায়ারমেন্টে যাকে তুমি পুরোপুরি সময় দাও অন্য কাজে। Now that was perhaps the best advice, because Hari and I both post our retirement never took retirement seriously. We were both involved with institutions and we were running around. Our lives was about being in places, being in institutions, being with work. This idea of a quiet retired life where you just researched and wrote never happened to us, and it may happen to me now, I don't know. But Pradipta had set an example. So when his daughter talked about Tapti, spoke about all the books he wrote and all the time he now gave to serious reading and writing in the comfort of his own library and home, is an advice that remained with me. And I hope someday when I'm feeling a bit better and better able to work, I can take Pradipta's advice more seriously. My condolences to Pradipta's wife and daughter and to his brother, his dada, who I think I met once. I don't remember meeting Pradipta's daughter and his wife, but my sincere condolences to them.
Thank you so much, Tapatidi. Bodhi, are you there? Bodhi Shastri?
Yes, I'm here.
That's from South Africa. Okay, good. Good to see you. Go ahead.
Thank you. For me, there are people you can reminisce about in English, and there are people you just cannot. And the savage wit of Pradipta had something so intensely vernacular, so untranslatably intimate about it that it demands a Bangla narration. So all the stories that are running through my head are hardly adaptable to the Queen's polite tongue. So with very sincere apologies to the members of the audience who may not be able to follow the language, I will say a couple of things in Bangla. PhD করার সময় থেকে আমি প্রদীপদার আশেপাশে ঘুরঘুর করতাম, এটা ওটা নিয়ে বিরক্ত করতাম, অভদ্রতা করতেন না কিন্তু পাত্তা দিতেন না প্রদীপদা একদম। ওসব লোকের তো হাত ঝাড়লেই পর্বত, তো কথায় কথায় একদিন বললেন নজেলোটা পড়ো। বৃহত্তর ফুকো পরিবারে সেই আমার প্রথম প্রবেশ। পরে ফ্রাঁসোয়া ওয়ার্ল্ড আবিষ্কার, ফুকোর ক্রিশ্চিয়ানিটি চর্চা, সাইদের মিউজিক্যাল ইলাবোরেশনসটা একটু বুঝিয়ে দিন না, তারপরে বিরজা শঙ্করের হার্ভার্ড জীবন। নিজের পড়াশোনার সময় অনেক কিছু নিয়ে প্রদীপদার কাছ থেকে অনেক ক্লু পেয়েছি, অনেক তর্ক করেছি, অনেকের মতোই অনেক অঢেল শিখেছি। সেই কৃতজ্ঞতা তো আমি কবরে নিয়ে যাব, সেটা এখানে বলার জায়গা আজ নয় বোধহয়। যেটা বলার সেটা হচ্ছে প্রদীপদার সান্নিধ্যের জন্য আমরা ছোটরা কিরকম মুখিয়ে থাকতাম। 12 মাসে বা অনুষ্টুপে বা টেক্সটস অফ পাওয়ারে যার গম্ভীর দ্যুতিময় লেখা পড়ে আমাদের মেটে বৌদ্ধিক জীবনের শুরু, সেন্টারের কালচারাল স্টাডিজ ওয়ার্কশপে ছাত্র হিসেবে প্রথম গিয়ে প্রথম বুঝলাম যে ওই দ্যুতিময় হীরকখণ্ডটির কাছে পৌঁছতে গেলে কিছুদিন ক্রমাগত রঙিন জলে সাঁতার দিতে হবে। পরে সেন্টারে চাকরি করতে গিয়ে এই রঙের ছটা, যাকে বলে বর্ণবাহার, একটু কাছ থেকে দেখার সুযোগ হয়েছে। কাকে যেন লিখছিলাম প্রদীপদা চলে যাওয়ার পর, প্রদীপদা শেষ ক্লাসিক্যাল দার্শনিক, মূল শিক্ষাটা পানশালাতেই হতো। কলকাতা ছেড়ে কেপটাউন আসার পরও দীর্ঘ অনেক বছর যে কয়েকটা জিনিস মিস করেছি, তার মধ্যে প্রধান হচ্ছে, এবং বিশেষ করে সেটার কারণ এখানে এই কেপটাউনে যেহেতু প্রদীপদার ভাষায় সবসময় আবগারি ওয়েদার, মাঝে মাঝে বড়দের করিডোর থেকে সেন্টারের অন্য প্রান্তে আমার অফিসে 4:30 নাগাদ যে ফোনটা আসতো, কি বোধি গ্রিপ পাল্টালো নাকি, অর্থাৎ কলম ছেড়ে এই গ্রিপ ছেড়ে গেলাস ধরার মুদ্রা হয়েছে কিনা। তারপরে গসিপে বা অন্য কোনো পানশালায় গল্পের পর গল্প, শত জল ঝর্ণার ধ্বনি, অননুকরণীয় সেই সব ডেড প্যান ডেলিভারি। একবার বাজারে ছেড়ে দিলে, তপতিদি বললেন, একবার বাজারে ছেড়ে দিলে আর কিছুতেই অন্য কিছু ভাবা যাবে না, এরকম সব ডাক নাম দেওয়া, হালকা খোঁচা, পিছনে লাগা, আর তার মধ্যে গলা নামিয়ে দু একটা সিরিয়াস কথা। কয়েকটা গল্প আজ এখানে হলো, অনেকগুলো আমিষ গল্প নিশ্চয়ই অনেকের মনে পড়ছে, যেগুলো আজ এখানে বলা যাবে না, পার্থদা বললেন। প্রদীপদার অ্যানেকডোটাল পার্সোনাটা তো আইসবার্গের মতো, অধিকাংশ গল্পগুলোই ভদ্রলোকের নিরাপদ সীমানার বাইরে। অনেকগুলো নিরামিষ গল্পও আছে। কুস্তিগিরদের সঙ্গে দারা সিং এর ফিল্ম দেখার সেই অবিস্মরণীয় গল্প, যেখানে কুস্তির সিন শেষ হয়ে গেলে গ্যালারি থেকে বাজ গম্ভীর স্বরে আওয়াজ উঠতো ফিরছে। অথবা ভারতে হিউম্যানিটিজ এর প্রথম যুগে কাইন্ড অফ পিএইচডি ভাইভার সময় দেবানন্দের ফ্রিল দেওয়া শার্টের মডুলার ভূমিকা ছিল কি ছিল না। অথবা ফিল্ড ওয়ার্ক ক্লান্ত অ্যানথ্রোপোলজিস্টের ডিজার্মিং চিঠি, একটা জগৎ যেটা আমরা দেখিনি, দেখতে পাবো না কোনোদিন। ছোট ছোট ঝলমলে চুটকিতে সেই জগতের গুরুত্ব আর অ্যাবসার্ডিটি একই সঙ্গে ধরিয়ে দেওয়ার মতো অ্যানেকডোট, মতো কাইন্ড অফ মেথড আর কি বা আছে অ্যানেকডোট ছাড়া, আর কেই বা আছে প্রদীপদা ছাড়া ওটা ধরিয়ে দেওয়ার। আমাদের থেকেও অলক্ষণের সময় যারা বড় হচ্ছে তারা প্রদীপদার সান্নিধ্য পাবে না, এটাই আমার মনে হয় যে তাদের শিক্ষার একটা খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ দিক অসম্পূর্ণ থেকে যাবে। বোকাকে বোকা এবং গাধাকে গাধা বলা যায় না যে নতুন আহা উহু সংস্কৃতিতে। এক একটা গল্পে তার মাথা থেকে এক একটা ছাদ ছড়িয়ে দিতেন প্রদীপদা। ইররেভারেন্সের কথাটা প্রদীপদা সম্পর্কে গত কয়েকদিনে অনেকে অনেকবার বলেছেন, আমি ওটা বলছি না। আর প্রদীপদার সঙ্গে চালাচালি করা নিজের শেষ হোয়াটসঅ্যাপ মেসেজগুলো দেখছি, ইররেভারেন্স তো আছেই, আর আছে একটা সর্বগ্রাসী ধারালো বুদ্ধি যেটার ভিতরে দপদপ করছে এমন কিছু একটা 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 সবকিছু নস্যাৎ করার জীবনী শক্তি। সেটা প্রদীপদার অপরিচিত লোকে সিনিসিজম বলে ভুল করতে পারে, কিন্তু আমাদের অনেকের কাছে সেটা প্রায় ট্রান্সভ্যালুয়েশন অফ ভ্যালুস বলেই ঠেকতো। নিরাশা করজ্জ্বল কথাটা সুধীন বাবু সম্পর্কে জীবনানন্দ বলেছিলেন। আমার ছোট্ট অভিজ্ঞতায় ওই বিশেষণের কোনো দ্বিতীয় উত্তরাধিকারী আমি প্রদীপদা ছাড়া দেখিনি। দাপট, দ্যুতি, মজলিস, এইসব কথাগুলোর আসল মানে আস্তে আস্তে আমরা ভুলে যাব। প্রদীপদার সঙ্গে কথোপকথনের স্মৃতিগুলো যতদিন থাকবে, আমার অন্তত ওই মানেগুলো ভুলে যাওয়ার কোনো উপায় নেই, কোনো নিষ্কৃতি নেই।
থ্যাংক ইউ বতি। তুমি দুটো ছবি পাঠিয়েছিলে প্রদীপদার সঙ্গে, কলকাতায় কোথাও মনে হলো, সেগুলো দেখে ভাল লাগলো।
ব্রডওয়েজ।
অভিজিৎ ভট্টাচার্য, Pradip Da worked extensively in the archives. Many people have talked about his work and the books that resulted from that work. We thought Abhijit, are you there? Might want to say a few words. Yeah, please go ahead. We can't see you yet. Is your video working?
Yeah, I think yes.
Oh, there you are. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. It's actually my association is not that long, but still 28 years is not that short too. I can still vividly remember my first official visit to center with Indiradi, or with a hope of getting something like something of like a research assistantship under the Indreka program, and an opportunity of working with under participants. So I can remember the visit with Indiradi to the office of Partsoda on the second floor of Bulletin Lecturer's office. And that was too much for me on first day as for a graduate student, sitting in a chair opposite of Partsoda. And that was quite casual. I was a little scary at the beginning. My next meeting was with Sushanta Babu, and that was really scary. Sushanta Babu grilled me for at least for 10 minutes. And later I knew that he was quite generous that day. And after Sushanta was grilling, Partsoda asked me, well, you better meet Pradip and get to know, get yourself familiar, what you actually have to do. And I thought it must be something. After getting grilled by Sushanta, I thought, who is this Pradip? And what else is waiting for me? So I was just started checking. Anyway, Indradi took me to his third floor office, and I have seen a gentleman, little above, quite taller, much more taller than any average Bengali, with a little bit longish hair, smoking a cigarette, looking at the ceiling. And just was initially have to notice us entering the room. And just after entering the room, still I remember, Indradi took out her pack of cigarette from her bag and said me that you can smoke here. So I thought, well, it's the smoking room, not the grilling room. So, okay, that's the beginning. So then there are many things. It was really a pleasure working with Pradipta. We worked for Archive, we worked for Shamayaki, but those things were not that, well, those were very much a good thing. But real fun began after the Shamayaki project was over. That was some little bit of tough time for the center when we started working for some odd projects. And so that I can still remember the rights project for which we made several trips to several places of across West Bengal. And Pradipta and I accompanied mostly Pradipta and Donjaka and to serve. So those trips are memorable from where for the first time I learned about the other personality of Pradipta, the witty Pradipta, who never missed a single opportunity of teasing me for my longish hair then. And also for my little bit bloated tummy. And yes, during this a little bit tough field trips, sometimes without any food for throughout the day, or some really terrible lunch at 3 o'clock in some at some small dhapa in Bashanti, where everyone, all of us were complaining about the food, except Pradipta, who usually says, well, যেখানে যা পাচ্ছ খেয়ে নাও, সন্ধ্যাবেলাতে দুটো রাম খেয়ে নেবে, সব ঠিক হয়ে যাবে. So that was Pradipta, okay. So, and after that rights project and all this, we moved to Patoli, to a much bigger office, and our addas were restricted. Then gradually started restricting within the canteen only, instead of through all day adda kind of. Well, yeah, a few of us were talking about Pradipta's. We had some common. Well, one, of course, Bengali text. Then the other thing is technology. Yeah, Pradipta has a natural knack in technology. But for some reason, I can still remember one thing. Pradipta was against mobile in its initial early days. And still I remember Shugodada among us, Shugodada was the first mobile phone user at the center. And Pradipta, first thing Pradipta said, Shugoda amader nak katalo. So, but within few months, I have noticed a very fancy latest model of mobile phone in Pradipta's hand, and he was trying to figure out something on that. I said, what you have done now? So, okay. Then he explained me what a technological wonder this mobile phone is. And after that, I noticed that the frequently changed handset, always upgraded to latest makes and models. Well, okay, this is, yeah, it's really fun. So after Pradipta's retirement, I often received phone calls from Pradipta. And last one, I can remember, just before the breakout of the pandemic, say around either in January or in February of 2020, in search of some text. He called me, and then I mailed him the answer after a few days. And that was the last call. And after that, I have this on 29th, in the evening of 29th May, I received a message from Rajesh with the critical news. That took a while to digest. Actually, I should have received another last phone call.
Thank you very much, Abhijit. Our next speaker today is Dr. Bibhash Bagchi, who teaches sociology at the University of Bardhaman. Are you there, Dr.
Yeah.
Bagchi? Yeah. Please go ahead.
Am I audible? Yes.
Yes,
okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. I thank the center for giving me the opportunity to speak in this condolence session. I came to know Pradip when actually possibly in 1987, I came to meet Anjunda. And Anjunda was a friend of Pradip. And as far as I can remember, in those days, in the old premise of the center, there was small cubicles. And when I used to visit Anjunda, in the very first days, Pradip was seated next to him. And after that, he shifted to some other place. But that was initial introduction with Pradip. I was not fortunate enough to have develop an intimacy with him. I was then a student only. But what I can remember is the broad smile in his face, as so many eminent persons have spoken of it. As we crossed the corridors, I can remember there was no exchange with Pradip, but he used to smile always. There was no failing in that smile. And we exchanged smile without a single word. Much later on, when I became a student in the RTP, then that's a nostalgia to me that he came with a book and he used to teach us for that course, the Psychopathology of Everyday Life by Sigmund Freud. I can remember that distinctly. He was my supervisor in the RTP course, and I was working on Can There Be a Sociology of India? And he was slightly bit irritated with me because I was very irregular in visiting him for the dissertation, for the purpose of the dissertation. But what appeared to me, and this is the first time which I experienced that in center. Center was like that. He never scolded me. He never was rude to me that you are not coming, you are not attending properly. He never said to me. He was just a little bit irritated. So that is the memory of Pradip Bose that I can fondly remember from my RTP days in '96. And after that, when we were at the Bardhaman University, as Tapatiti said, I cannot really, Anjunda and Pradip, we could only remember together. After Anjunda left, it was a vacuum because we were so much dependent on, in some ways or the other, on the center. And for all our syllabus construction, syllabus revisions, drafting syllabus, seeking advices. We always rush to Pradipda. Pradipda, please situate that, whether it's correct or not, it's proper, whether we need any kind of revisions or modifications. And he was always there. He was always there with his helping hand. I can't remember even for a single occasion he refused that. And in this way, our university, like, which is in some way the other semi-urban university, profusely received help from both Anjunda and Pradipda. Occasionally, sometimes, just a few months back, I was discussing with my student, who is now a college teacher, that whether we can take up a work so that we can go to the field work where Pradipda visited, possibly 1978, and wrote his class structure in rural Bengal. And we were just discussing whether we could again visit that place. And that would be a fantastic thing to understand the change, what has happened in rural Bengal regarding the class structure. And only after a fortnight after the discussion, this absolutely shocking news came. I don't know whether it would be, in the future, it can be taken up as a tribute to my teacher, my very, very revered teacher, as a kind of longitudinal comparative study. Another thing which I should mention is that is one of the articles which has very much attracted me, is what was published in Sociological Bulletin in 2014 on the place of the individual. And it was Pradipda's writing. Pradipda was assessing D.P. Mukherjee's overcoming of the individualism in social science. I think that is a fantastic piece, because Pradipda was bringing in so many Western theories as well as counterposing with the Indian thinkers on the place of the individual in the non-Western space. I think that is something which will leave its mark in the future in the sort of engagement with the question of the individual in the non-Western space. With this, I express my deep sorrow and my condolence to the family of Professor Pradip Bose and the fraternity and academic fraternity in center, and also all of those who are associated with it, which is a terrible loss. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Bakshi. Thank you for speaking. Our next speaker today is Ritu Sen Chaudhary. She was supposed to speak next. She's a PhD student of Pradipda's and is currently a teacher sociology at the West Bengal State University. But I thought I saw Johorda's hand raised, you know, the digital hand. Johorda, were you saying that you wanted to speak? Would you like to say a few words? Then you can go next, and we have only 3 speakers left, Ritu, and then Kali Babu, and then Anirban. Did I see a raised hand?
Actually,
yeah,
I was actually fiddling around with those keys and it came up, but fortuitously so. I think I'm the only non-academic here, and which is the cause for a lot of trepidation. But as one who has hung around the center for a pretty long time as some sort of an antidote to the overwhelming boredom of the administrative service, as one who has specialized and could actually write a book on snatching from academia, not a lot of wisdom, which of course is yet to be made into a meaningful tapestry. I would only say that my brief encounters with Pradipda were really fruitful. The center was not only a catchment area, it was a happy hunting ground for me. It was a welcome escape from the haunt of my colleagues in the civil services, who may have topped some university exam at some distant point of time, but had become bureaucrats. Whatever be it, I was then working on my abortive thesis, and the construction of the conversion of tribes to caste was quite a controversial area, however simplistic it may appear to be. This is when I accosted Pradipda twice or maybe thrice. I found him delightfully helpful, which I'm afraid is something that I can't accuse all academics of. I found him delightfully helpful. On the second meeting, I found him to be extremely witty, and today my heart bleeds for him from the picture that I've gathered from the talks and speeches and tributes made by everyone, including Roma. But I didn't know she knew him so well. I guess she did. Manoj, they all spoke so well. My only lasting regret is that I could have carried on the conversation with him beyond 6, which I didn't. He was a scholar whom I read occasionally, and 2 or 3 of his works, I think I've quoted one in my monograph or whatever summary I've brought out. I really regret not having known him better. I take this occasion to thank the center for keeping me away from a lot of wolves, and I pass my condolences. I sincerely give my condolences to Pradipda's family members. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words, Johorda. I will ask Ritu Shenchodhuri to speak next. Ritu, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, but I'm afraid my
Video
video
is
is
not
not
working?
working. একটু অসুবিধা হচ্ছে।
Don't worry, please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you, Rosinka Di. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts about Pradipda with you all. I know Pradipda since last 20 years or more. It's a long association, and actually I'm not yet ready to say something about him formally. Several moments are kind of clogging the memory. His laughter, his wit, his humor, his kind of encyclopedic elegance, his kind of defending me in institutional spaces where many people would not support your ideas and thoughts. Pradipda's very silent affection and many more things are coming all together. I will try to give it a semblance of order. I'll try. So in 2021, the Contributions to Indian Sociology publishes an obituary for Yogendra Singh written by his admirable scholar Pradip Bose. And you see, it's mid-June, we assemble to commemorate Pradipda. Death is the almost potential for being. I remember my old diary, the faded lecture notes. I remember Pradipda speaking on Heidegger. Yes, besides being an esteemed sociologist, Professor Pradip Bose has also been a celebrated mentor to a number of students like me. Within the broad edifice of social and political theory, his copious covered multiple themes and issues so perfectly been brought up by the previous speakers. Yes, Professor Guru, of course, I remember the ingenious exchanges between Professor Sarukai, Pradipda, and you while we were trying to conceptualize the notions of experience, caste, and the everyday social in a late 2020 webinar. I would like to highlight a significant dimension of his opus in Bangla. Though he has kept himself busy in writing and lecturing in Bangla since quite some time, his post-retirement has been a more direct plunge into a cause. Pradipda sought to develop a form of serious academic prose in Bangla, more than familiarizing the Bengali readership to social theories and issues. His effort has been to advance Bangla as a language of relevance in contemporary academic discourse. As we all know, he's a connoisseur of Western classical music. He also has a fantastic collection of rare periodicals and folk artifacts. He also has a keen interest in cooking. He has shared several recipes and the perfect way of cooking them. It's already been highlighted that if one wants to get a glimpse of his real elan, one has to be with him in an adda. I especially remember the long adda sessions on our way to the West Bengal State University. He has been a visiting faculty, a member of our PG board, persistently mentoring our department. The interactions have always been very intriguing, insightful. He had his typical hard to believe stories, ranging from Althusser Foucault antagonism to Devanand's Gulfamia, meandering its courses to catch up the secrets of more recent Bollywood stars like Anushka Sharma or Deepika Padukone. Either he has a detective agency or all of them happen to be his next door neighbors. Back in 1998, I came to meet him in his wooden cubicle at the old building of CSSSC called Jodunath Bhavan. Anjanda was with me. He introduced me to Pradipda. I also have very fond memories of Anjanda, but then that is yet another story. Since then, in these 2 long decades, he has given out a space for me, open for discussions and arguments, alliances and disagreements. I feel fortunate to have come in close contact with him and admired his uncompromising study habits, sitting at his large squarish desk with a cup of coffee. And if it is sometimes after the sunset, it would have surely turned into a peg of scotch. He had a very easy solution to every problems I would take to him. So he would always say that, "Duto peg khe nao." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ritu. We have Kali Babu should be coming next. I'm sure Kali Babu needs no introduction. He has been the mainstay of the CSSSC library for more years than anybody can remember. Kali Babu, apni ki achen? Apni ki ekhon bolben? After Kali Babu, Anirban will speak. Anirban is the only person in the center now who was actually also co-supervised by Pradip Das, so a student of Pradip Das. And after both of them, Shukla Bose, Pradip Das' wife, has asked to say a few words. So with her, we will finish today. So if I can find Kali Babu, apni achen? Hello.
Rosinka, আমি কিন্তু কালী বাবুকে দেখিনি. I've been scrolling.
Yeah, the thing is also people have been signing in under different names. So I was wondering whether, he has, sort of entered it as someone else, but I can't see Kali Babu in the list. Certainly there's no Kali Prasad Bose in the list. I was just asking in case he's there under with somebody else's computer or somebody else's name. But since he's not responding, I'll ask Anirban to go next. Anirban, in case Kalibabu joins us, he can speak after you, perhaps, if he does join us at all. So, Anirban, if you would go next, and then Mrs. Shukla Bose will conclude today's condolence meeting. So, Anirban, are you there?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. So, like, it's quite difficult to say a few things about Pradip Da because I have so many things. I had been his student for quite a long time. Like when I was moving in from medicine to the humanities and social sciences, he was the main person who in a way guided me in because he was the dissertation supervisor in my research training program. Many of us like fondly remember those days. And he also was one of my supervisors in my PhD. And then for a few months, we worked together as colleagues at the center. So I have so many memories, so many things to say. But I'd like to first, I think, remember him as a teacher who has been like meticulously serious about his students' works, and yet like astonishingly generous. I remember when I was presenting my RTP presentation, I was procrastinating. We all know these things. And it was the day of the presentation when I brought him my handwritten thing and read him out. And then he said, "Oh, thik ache, hoye jabe, chalo." So he has been that is like Pradip Da, as we all know him. And yet, like, he defended me in the presentation, like, and ferociously defended me. Like, I still remember like how he could. So like a faith in his students. I think as a student, what I cherished most was his faith in us, and which attracted a number of us, Onupis here also probably, like who came in from different disciplines, from different ways of thought, and yet like have been doing for some time now, like humanities and social sciences in various ways. So it was a faith in us, and yet a criticality. He would retain that faith even when we disagreed, which is not a thing one can say about many. That thing I really cherish. And definitely another thing which has come up a number of times today is his faith in Bangla reading, Bangla writing. I remember like definitely after retirement, he has written volumes, and the work he has done is really tremendous. I probably have almost all his Bangla books with me. I have always followed him. I remember like there was a small Bangla article which came out in, I think probably in Anandabajar, which talked about how like Bangla is really not yet ready for serious writing. Like that was an angry response to the readers rather. And yet he himself was like proving it wrong at the time when he was writing this. So this was an angry response of someone who is always like very intimately, closely related to the language and its writing in a very serious mode. Just another thing I would like share is his real, very intense attachment to philosophy of science. Like he came from physics, we know, and but he had a very intense engagement with it. That is one thing which like resonated with me. I still remember, like Bodhi was talking about the number of some just often reference to certain books or essays. I remember probably like it was something like criticism and the growth of knowledge. He just told me about this at the initial stage, and which would open up like ways of thinking, ways of learning. And like his Bangla book also like came up very recently. It was on Bigyaner Darshan, the philosophy of science. So I whenever one remembers Pradip one remembers the twinkle in his eyes when he talked, and in a way one himself has a like fond smile coming up when one thinks of him, and I will retain that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anirban. Kalibabu, আপনি কি join করেছেন by any chance under any other name? No. So, okay, maybe Kalibabu has been unable to join. We do know that he wanted to speak and we had invited him to speak, but maybe he was unable to today. So I will now ask Mrs. Shukla Bose to say a few words. Are you there? Tapti, you had messaged me saying that your mother wanted to say a few words. Are you still here?
She has come.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, she will.
Thank you.
Oh, there. Yes. Please go ahead.
আমি এখানে সবাই তো প্রদীপের কথা বলছে, প্রদীপ কি কাজ করেছে না করেছে। আমি ওর স্ত্রী, আমি প্রদীপকে যতটা জানি অন্য কেউ ততটা জানি না। আমি ওর লিমিটেশনও জানি, ওর ডেভেলপমেন্টও জানি। কলকাতার পাঠক সমাজে বা বিদ্বৎ সমাজে প্রদীপ কি করে আজকে এত পপুলার হয়েছে, কাদের সাহায্যে হয়েছে আমি সেটা বলতে চাই। আমি প্রদীপের কি ট্যালেন্ট আছে আমি সেটা বলতে চাইছি না। আমি চাইছি ওকে ডেভেলপ করার জন্য, ওর ট্যালেন্ট ডেভেলপ করার জন্য কারা কারা সাহায্য করেছে। ওর চাকরি, প্রথমে ও দিল্লি সেন্টারে চাকরি করত, সেখানে পড়ে পড়ে ঘুমতো, তখন পিএইচডি কিছু করেনি, আশিস নন্দী ওকে ভাগিয়ে দেয়। হ্যাঁ, তারপরে ও জেএনইউতে চান্স পায়, পিএইচডি শুরু করে, বুঝতে পেরেছেন? আচ্ছা, সেই পিএইচডি ডেটা কালেক্ট করার জন্য ও শ্রীনিকেতনে আসে। তখন আমার সঙ্গে, আগেই দিল্লিতে পরিচয় ছিল, তখন আমার সঙ্গে পরিচয় হয় এবং ডেটা কালেকশন করাতে আমি সাহায্য করি, তার ফলে আমার সঙ্গে ঘনিষ্ঠতা এবং ভবিষ্যতে আমরা বিয়ে করি।
My screen has frozen. Is it okay for everyone else? Hello?
সমাজ এই ওকে তিনজন সাহায্য করেছে। প্রথম পার্থ চ্যাটার্জি, ও যদি সেন্টারে না আসতো এবং পার্থ চ্যাটার্জির সঙ্গে যদি ও না থাকতো, তাহলে এই যে 19th সেঞ্চুরির উপর যে স্টাডি গুলো করছে ও হতো না শুনে। 2 নম্বর হচ্ছে অনুষ্টুপের অনিল বিশ্বাস, অনিল আচার্য, ওর লেখাগুলো ছাপাতে থাকে। 3 নম্বর হচ্ছে রাঘব বন্দ্যোপাধ্যায়, চর্যাপদ করে রিটায়ারমেন্টের পর ওর বই ছাপায়, জানে যে টাকা লাভ হবে না, তা সত্ত্বেও ও ছাপিয়েছে। আরেকটা কথা আমি বলতে চাইছি, আমার ইচ্ছে ছিল প্রদীপ যাতে নাকি মহাত্মা গান্ধীর উপর রিসার্চ করে। সুরাটে ও কিছুতেই রাজি হলো না, কারণ ও মহাত্মা গান্ধীর অসম্ভব বিরুদ্ধে ছিল। যখন ও রাজি হলো না, তখন আমি বললাম আমি আর সুরাটে থাকবো না। গুজরাটে কিসের জন্য থাকবো যদি মহাত্মা গান্ধীর উপরই তুমি স্টাডি না। যাক, কলকাতায় আসার পর যখন নাকি ও ঊনবিংশ শতাব্দীর ওপর কাজকর্ম শুরু করলো, তখন পার্থ আমি একটা কথা বলছি, প্রদীপের সুরাটে যখন ছিল পার্থ চ্যাটার্জির মতন অতটা ভাষার ওপর ওর অধিকার ছিল না, বুঝতে পেরেছেন? এবং ওর ইংরেজি এবং বাংলা ভাষায় কিছুটা লিমিটেশন ছিল। এই ঊনবিংশ শতাব্দীর ওপর কাজ করতে করতে ওর ভাষার ওপর বিশাল একটা দখল আসে। তখন আমি আবার বলি তুমি মহাত্মা গান্ধীর উপর স্টাডি করো, ও কিছুতেই করবে না। আমার একটাই অনুরোধ ও রেখেছিল, যেটা নাকি বাংলা ভাষায় সমাজবিদ্যার চর্চাটা, এই বইটা ও লেখে। এবং যখন ও নির্মল বোসের উপর আবার পড়াশোনা শুরু করে, আমি আবার বলি ও মহাত্মা গান্ধীর উপর তুমি স্টাডি করো। কারণ ও যে থিসিসটা করেছিল বীরভূমে, সেখানে দেখবেন বহু মাও সেতুংয়ের কোটেশন আছে, ল্যান্ড রিলেশন নিয়ে ইত্যাদি। তারপরে রুরাল ক্লাসেসের ওপরও মানে বইপত্র লিখেছে। ও সব সময় ক্লাস সিস্টেমে বিশ্বাস করতো। আমি সব সময় বলতাম যে মানে চীন বলুন, রাশিয়া বলুন, ফরাসি বলুন, কোথাও বিপ্লব হয়নি। কতগুলো মানুষ শুধু কতগুলো মানুষকে হত্যা করেছে। আধিপত্য, অত্যাচার, জুলুম, শোষণ, ধর্ষণ সবকিছু সমাজে থেকে গেছে। একমাত্র মহাত্মা গান্ধী হত্যা ছাড়া বিপ্লবের চেষ্টা করেছিলেন। মহাত্মা গান্ধীও বিপ্লব করতে পারেননি, কিন্তু তিনি চেষ্টা করেছিলেন। এই জন্য আমার ইচ্ছে ছিল আবার ও গান্ধীর এমন ডিটেল স্টাডি করুন যাতে নাকি ও মানে একটা কিছু মানে প্রমাণ করতে পারে, কিন্তু ও আমার কথা শোনেনি। সেই জন্য আমার আর ওর কাজে আর পরের দিকে কিছু আর ইন্টারেস্ট রইল না। এইটা হচ্ছে আমার কথা। হ্যাঁ, আচ্ছা, তাছাড়া এখন যে বইগুলো তাহলে এই যে বর্তমানে কুলজি বিচার ইত্যাদি লিখেছে, সেইগুলো হচ্ছে পশ্চিমের দার্শনিক বা তাত্ত্বিকদের চিন্তা ধারাটা ও আমাদের বর্তমান কলকাতার, বিশেষত কলকাতার নাগরিক জীবনের সঙ্গে মিলিয়ে মিশিয়ে লিখেছে। এটা ধরুন অল্প বয়সী যারা ছাত্রছাত্রী, অধ্যাপক, অধ্যাপিকা, তাদের খুবই ভালো লাগে, কিন্তু এইটা সমাজের কোনো কাজে আসবে না। কারণ ওর হচ্ছে গ্রামীণ সমাজের লোকেদের সঙ্গে ও সেভাবে মেলামেশা করেনি। ওর আড্ডা মেলামেশা সবটাই ছিল শহরের শিক্ষিত গ্রুপ, এই যেমন মানুষ, দই পায় না ইত্যাদি। তারা তাদের সঙ্গে আলোচনা করে কোনোদিনও দেশের ও যা মানে লিখেছে সেটাতে ও কলকাতার বিদ্যুৎ সমাজে ও খুবই পপুলার হতে পারে, কিন্তু আমি যেটা চেয়েছিলাম সেটা ও করেনি। সেই জন্য স্ত্রী হিসাবে আমার আর ওর কোনো কাজে আমার কোনো ইন্টারেস্টেড হইল না। এইখানে বলে আমি ওর সম্বন্ধে মানে কথা বলা শেষ করছি। আর আপনাকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ যে এই কথাটা বলার সুযোগ আমাকে দিয়েছে।
অনেক ধন্যবাদ, আপনি এসেছেন, আমাদের সঙ্গে কথা বলেছেন, আমাদের খুব ভালো লাগলো। থ্যাংক ইউ। So with that then I will bring this condolence meeting, which has actually now gone on for 3 hours and 12 minutes, to a conclusion. Unless there is anybody in the audience, I had promised that I would do that. If there is anybody in the audience who absolutely must say something, and there are many people here who I know knew Pradip Da very well, who might want to say something. Madhav is here, Rajushi is here, Shushanto Babu is here. If Kiadi, if any Pradip, PK, if anybody wants to say even a word or two, please unmute yourselves, reveal yourselves, and if we've gone on for 3 hours and 13 minutes, I suppose another couple of minutes won't do anybody any harm. And that is in the tradition of the center, to keep going until we drop. So, so if there's anybody at all, would anybody like to speak? No?
Probably no, no?
Nah, mone hocche. This was the opportunity anyway.
Hello?
Yes?
Can I speak?
Yes, of course.
I'm Professor Vidyasagar University.
Yes, please.
আমার বৌদির উদ্দেশ্যে বলার একটাই কথা।
বলুন।
বৌদির একটা ক্ষোভ প্রকাশ পেল যে তিনি শুধু শহুরে মধ্যবিত্তের সঙ্গেই তার ওঠা বসা করেছে। বক্তব্যের সাথে আমি একমত নই, কারণ জীবনের শেষ পর্যায়ে আমি জানি বিদ্যাসাগর বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে যখন সমাজতত্ত্ব বিভাগ চালু করলাম, তখন তিনি সব ধরনের সহযোগিতার সাথে করেছেন। এবং শুধু তাই নয়, তিনি আমাদের আবেদনে সাড়া দিয়ে ছাত্রদের ক্লাস নিয়েছেন, তাদের সঙ্গে মেলামেশা করেছেন। ফলে বৌদির এটা বোধহয় বৌদি নিশ্চয়ই খেয়াল আছে, বিদ্যাসাগর হি হ্যাড এ ক্লোজ অ্যাসোসিয়েশন উইথ ডিপার্টমেন্ট অফ
হ্যালো,
ইয়েস প্লিজ বলুন।
আমার নাম দিলীপ বসু। আমি প্রদীপকে চিনি তার ছোটবেলা থেকে। ওর দাদার নাম আর আমার নাম এক।
আচ্ছা,
আমরা একসঙ্গে নাটক দল করেছি। আমি লোককে জানাতে চাই যে সমস্ত যে আলোচনাগুলো হচ্ছে তাতে প্রদীপ যে নাটক লিখতো সম্মিলিতভাবে আমাদের নাটক লেখায়, প্রদীপ যে ভালো অভিনয় করে পুরস্কারও পেয়েছে, এগুলো একেবারেই আলোচনা হচ্ছে না। সেই ফাজিল অল্প বয়সী প্রদীপের সঙ্গে বছরের পর বছর, দিনের পর দিন, যেহেতু আমরা রোজই বসতাম আড্ডায়, নাটক লেখার আড্ডায়, আমরা একসঙ্গে ফিরেছি। ও ফিরেছে জনকপুরি করলবাগ থেকে, আমি নেমে গেছি মাঝখানে রাজৌরি গার্ডেনে। এই বন্ধুত্বটুকু আজকে তো সময়ই নেই। এই জায়গাটা আমি আশা করি কেউ কখনো আবিষ্কার করবে। চীনে অপেরার উপরে ওর একটা চমৎকার লেখা আমাদের পত্রিকায়, নাট্যকাল পত্রিকায় রয়ে গেছে, যেটা কোনোদিন ছাপার মুখ দেখেনি। আমার সঙ্গে প্রদীপের মাস দুয়েক আগেও কথা হয়েছিল, ওটা তুই ছাপাবি না কোথাও, এই আর কি, এই গল্পটুকু বললাম।
থ্যাংক ইউ, আমি জানতাম না, জেনে ভালো লাগলো, থ্যাংক ইউ। Madhav, sorry, you're saying I won't say anything, I just saw chat pop up. Are you sure you don't want to just say something, anything at all? Yeah, please go, please go.
Okay. Yeah, yes, I didn't want to prolong this, but yeah, I spent 2 years at the center, and Pradip was my colleague during those times, and and I used to meet him occasionally, even later, whenever I visited Calcutta. And I have nothing but the happiest memories of my time with Pradip. We were, of course, every day, at the Udupi restaurant lunches, where we would hear stories about, which were ostensibly about Gavaskar and Rahul Dravid and so on, but were actually about various people, and of course the cultural studies workshops, where we had a lot of fun. And I think, thanks to Pradip and some of us, a lot of people didn't sleep properly at night. There were a lot of singing of kirtans, etc. Prabhat Pheris and that sort of thing. So he was really kind of animating presence, and he was full of, I think I don't have to go into those. There are many anecdotes, many stories, but some of them not for public sharing. Yeah, he was a very lively person. I hardly, I would not have known how much of a, a respected scholar he was if I were only talking to him about, because he never sort of, talked about his, the kind of work he was doing, unless you really asked him. It's only through other people and through my own discovery in Park Street, Oxford bookshop, his publications in Bangla and so on, that I realized how much of a scholar, important scholar he was. And yeah, this is an unexpected shock to hear that this COVID has taken away one more of our colleagues, and I'm deeply sad about it. But it was an occasion for me to remember him, all those nice times. So that's, yeah, thank you for letting me speak. That's all.
Thank you so much for joining us. So with that, we'll come to an end today. I don't see any other chats or any other raised hands. It has also been 3 hours and 20 minutes almost, so I will let everybody go. I thank everybody for joining us here today, for speaking to us, for sharing their memories. What is quite amazing is how how closely people experienced him, really. Even those who were not his close friends, people who were not relatives, people like me. I joined the center in 2002, and therefore I knew him only from then till he retired in 2008. But so many things have still not been said. I mean, I know he had a theory about crows. Uh, for instance, Lal Bajar was mentioned, the category of films that fall into the specific torture chamber where, you know, the inmate cannot stand the third degree torture of watching a particular filmmaker's films. Taupati didn't name the filmmaker, so I will not. No compunction in, just casually mentioning that, someone we consider that is considered one of the great singers of classical music in Calcutta now, he can't sing. So, so many memories and so much to say. And I'm glad that you've shared your thoughts with us today. Thank you especially to his wife and daughter for being with us. His older brother, Dilipda, thank you for coming. And thank you to everybody else. I won't keep you any longer. I hope we have the occasion to meet some other day in the sort of setting that we're used to seeing Pradipda in, to exchange those anecdotes. And you'll be surprised how many people said that we shall share our anecdotes at a separate venue and a separate time more suitable to Pradipda. So we shall do that. That promise still holds. Pravin, thank you for joining us from Copenhagen and staying with us throughout. Thank you. So with that, I will end the meeting today. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you so much for being here.